Chapter 1785. Don't even think about going out if your house is on fire. Everyone knew this. While the Alliance was quickly eliminating internal threats, the Horde was in a great crisis. The existence of the new Twilight Fortress was like a fish bone stuck in the throat of the Horde. Even though the barren lands were barren, their geographical location was extremely important. To the east of Duroder was the sea, and to the north was Azhara. To contact the other territories of the Horde, they had to go west or south. No matter where they went, they had to go through the barren lands. The lava rift that stretched from the northeast to the southwest and divided the barren lands into two halves was already a headache for the Horde. It was originally something that could be solved by building a few bridges, but when Gujar stirred up trouble, it suddenly became a matter of life and death for the Horde. The reason why the great chiefs never let the traitors go was because, although a strong foreign enemy would oppress the Horde, they would also unite the Horde. And the traitors would split the Horde and dig out the roots of the Horde. Ghoul, Dan and the Black Hand brothers from before had all met with a good end. Of course, for a moron like Gurus, it was only because the betrayal made him lose face, which was also against tradition. Damn it! I can't trust other races. I should have twisted off all the heads of that two-headed monster. Moron Roar was indeed worthy of the name Hellscream. At least his voice was loud enough that his roar could be heard by the entire Wisdom Valley. Of course, he had the right to speak without thinking and hurt the hearts of other races, but this time, the other chiefs could only pretend that they didn't hear him. This was because this incident was not just a problem in the Orc territory, but several large areas around it had been attacked by the Twilight Dragon. The barren lands were said to be barren lands. It was a very simple problem of the food chain. How could a barren land support a large number of herbivores? Without large herbivores, how could a giant creature like the dragon, who was at the top of the food chain, survive? To the northwest of the Vine Oasis was the Stoneclaw Mountain area. To the west was Magolii, which was covered in green grass and herds of Kodos. The main city of the Tauran, Thunder Cliff, was here. To the southwest was Faralas, which was lush with vegetation. About 300 kilometers to the east was the nest of the Dark Spear Trolls, Dark Spear Island. Further west of the Thunder Cliff was a desolate oasis in the middle of the region. These were all F*King tribal territories, and the Twilight Wyrms that had been nurtured by Nisario had completely treated these places as their hunting grounds and back gardens. Ordinary tribal warriors couldn't fight against these terrifying dragons at all. Once upon a time, the great dragon scientist Nefarian had researched a new type of dragon, the multicolored fish powder. Oh, no, it was the multicolored dragon. Nefarian's research direction was to fuse the abilities of the pentashade dragons in an attempt to create a new all-round dragon that was not afraid of the power of the dragons. He also used the technology of the goblins to speed up its growth, and finally succeeded in creating the colorful dragons. Although there was a huge gap between their strength and that of a real giant dragon, their advantage lay in their rapid growth, the ease of mass production, and the lack of fear of giant dragon power. Unfortunately, this research had just made a breakthrough when it was discovered by the Red Dragon Army. Then, Dumuk led a team to cause trouble and destroyed this great invention. Nefarian's biological mother, Sinestra, the spouse that Deathwing had forcibly brought back, had been conducting research in this area alone. Although her purpose was not to fight against the dragon aspect, but to take revenge on the crazy Deathwing. Sinestra noticed that the batch of black dragon eggs that had been brought to the Outland by a certain dragon during the Second Orc War had mutated in the broken world of the Outland because of the chaotic energy in the Twisted Void, and a new type of dragon was hatched, the Nether Dragon. The Nether Dragon was not as powerful as the dragon aspect, but it grew rapidly. Because it was born in the Outland environment, it had no connection with the Black Dragon Army, and was not affected by the fallen power of the ancient gods. However, it was enslaved by Magtheridon and later Illidan's fell orc tribe. Sinestra successfully obtained a large batch of nether dragon eggs from Zuluhid, the chief of the Dragon Maw tribe, and began her own transformation. After many experiments, she and her blood elf Zendari finally found a way to combine the essence of a black dragon with the essence of a nether dragon, and infused it into her own dragon eggs. In the end, a new type of dragon was hatched, the Twilight Dragon. Compared to other dragons, the Twilight Dragon's strength was comparable. Its special ability was to create a unique domain of twilight, and use this space to crazily absorb energy from the outside world to promote its growth. As long as there was enough energy for it to absorb, it would only take a few months or even a few weeks for it to hatch to adulthood. Ordinary dragons, on the other hand, needed 1,000 years to hatch to adulthood. Moreover, this new type of dragon was evil and greedy, even more so than the fallen black dragon. Sinestra died because of the backlash. Although Sinestra died, the remaining Twilight Dragon eggs and the transformation technology had been mastered by Deathwing. After that, Deathwing reconciled with the ancient god. With the power of the ancient god, Deathwing perfected this technology, simplifying the process of corruption into a kind of corruption power. No matter what kind of dragon's egg, if infected, could quickly hatch into an evil Twilight Dragon. Moreover, these Twilight Dragons had no brains and only obeyed the orders of Deathwing. Even if an adult dragon was contaminated by this evil power, it would be difficult to escape the fate of corruption. With the technology to transform the Twilight Dragon and the various dragon eggs stolen by the Twilight Hammer cult, Deathwing established a Twilight Dragon Legion in a very short period of time. Whether it was quantity or quality, it was enough to fight against the allied forces of the 4 dragon aspects. Such a Twilight Dragon was not something that the weak air force of the tribe could fight against. Whether it was the brave orcs, the stronger Tauren, the trolls who were good at throwing javelins, or the goblins of the Rustwater conglomerate who were placed in the Stonetolan mountain in this life, none of them were a match for the Twilight Dragons. Originally, Goron of the Desolace was not afraid of the Twilight Dragons. But these brainless Twilight Dragons still angered Goron's boss, Dragon Slayer Gruul. Most of the dragons were highly intelligent creatures. When Gruul played the Black Dragon Skewer in the Blade Peak Mountain, a large number of black dragons were shocked. Except for the first few black dragons, and later a dozen black dragons who went for revenge but failed to kill Gruul, there was no trace of the black dragons in the Blade Peak Mountain. Gruul did the same this time. After killing the Twilight Dragons, he played the Dragon Skewer. But the Twilight Dragons had no brains. They were still indifferent to the corpses of their companions. They hunted those that should be killed, set those that should be set on fire. They made Gruul's territory a mess, and many Gorons died. Why is the nearby Dustwallow swamp fine? The brainless roar cursed. The Alliance has Onyxia. Chapter 1786. Comparisons were odious. When comparing goods, one had to throw them away. If the Alliance did not have Duque, they would be like the Horde, helpless against the Twilight Dragon's invasion. When a giant dragon reached adulthood, its defense, attack, and vitality would all be considerable. If a young dragon could still be injured by lighter weapons such as flintlocks and javelins, then once they reached adulthood, their hardened scales and dragon skin would allow them to ignore damage from cannons and below. The tribe had an air force, and most of them were two-legged flying dragons. Unfortunately, as a pseudo-dragon, it could not overcome the natural flaw of a true dragon like the Twilight Wyrm. Once it encountered a real dragon, the wyvern would panic and lose control. It would either flee or fight back, but it would be as weak as a lowly whose clothes had been torn off and forced into a corner. Gruul was very strong, but in the end, this monster with a demigod body was just a super-large infantry. No matter how fast it ran, how could it keep up with so many Twilight Dragons that were flying around like blind flies? Only then did the Horde realize how heaven-defying it was for the Alliance to have a demigod dragon directly under them. This was cheating. The Dustwallow Swamp was Onyxia's lair. Before she went to Stormwind to wreak havoc, this once evil she-dragon was a local tyrant. Don't look at how she was ordered around by Duque after being subdued by Duque. In fact, she had many underlings. More than 10 adult dragons, more than 100 baby dragons, more than 300 dragon beasts, and about 1,000 to 800 baby dragons. This was the entire lineup of her little brother army. After knowing that the Twilight Fortress had been moved to the Barren Lands, Duque put Onyxia back in her lair so that she and Jaina's Theramore could cover for each other. If something went wrong, they could cover each other's escape. He knew that Onyxia was like a Haushaku Haki, killing more than 100 Twilight Dragons in a row without panting. Could this be the legendary Swamp, Mountain, 100-Dragon Tyrant? After causing the Twilight Dragon to run to Dustwallow Swamp, Braindead Roar cursed, "Is there no one stronger than the Twilight Fortress to deal with that lowly female dragon?" There was an answer. If that person came out, it was guaranteed that Onyxia would follow her heart. Following her heart, wasn't it just the word coward? The boss of the Twilight Fortress was naturally Onyxia's old mother, Sinestra. The problem was that her mother had been dead for a long time and was now a corpse dragon. Did the zombie dragon need to eat? Stop joking. As long as Wings and the Great Mother didn't make a move, Onyxia was the undisputed ruler of the skies. The Twilight Dragons had a couple of powerful players, but they were nothing compared to the new Earth Guardian Dragon, AO. However, Onyxia just guarded her own nest and didn't go anywhere. She would kill whoever came, and she wouldn't go out. It was as if she was a lady from a respectable family who never left the house. To put it bluntly, she was an otaku. Because of Brainless Roar, the Horde fell out with the Alliance. The Alliance pretended not to notice the Horde's predicament. Little Salufart secretly asked Wajin, "What's the situation on the Alliance's side?" Wajin smiled bitterly, "The Alliance continues to report the situation to me. The Storm Naga went to Vastur, the Blood Elves went to Uldum, the Dwarves and the Alliance's flying fleet are cleaning up grim battle, and the Alliance's navy is dealing with the riots in Barradin Prison. They look very busy." Several foreign chiefs smiled bitterly. After working with the Alliance for so many years, they roughly knew how much the Alliance had. Although the Alliance looked like they were putting out fires everywhere, in fact, the Alliance's main force didn't move at all. As the Alliance's strongest force, Duque didn't participate in the war. The infantry of Stormwind, the elites of the Watchtower, and the 2 flying cities. They didn't even need to use their main forces. Just the flying insect army of the Karaji insect people would be enough to fight evenly with the Twilight Dragon army of the Barren Land. The Alliance was now obviously unhappy with Gurus Hellscream. Since the great chief of the Horde didn't even give the Alliance an invitation, why should the Alliance go all the way from the Eastern Kingdom to help you get rid of the Twilight Fortress? It was at this time that Gurus made up his mind. The territory of the Horde must be defended by us. Varrock, gather all the warriors of the Horde, we will attack the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands. Yes. Varrock punched his chest and accepted the order. Perhaps Gurus' diplomatic strategy was a mess, but at least he was qualified as an orc leader. Fighting for the orcs, fighting for the territory, this kind of heroism from ancient times touched Varrock's heart. At this moment, all the orcs and foreign chiefs, including Varrock, didn't think that Gurus was such a scam. Thus, since the establishment of the new Horde, the largest war mobilization began. The orcs, Tauren, trolls, goblins, and the Forgotten, these 5 major races could be said to be the elites. With a large number of escorts from Gollans, more than 1 million troops were coming from all directions, ready to besiege the nail in the heart of the Horde, the Twilight Fortress. When Duque heard this news, he laughed, "Haha. This is really interesting. Then I wish Mr. Gurus victory, and let him become a hero of the Horde." To be honest, Duque didn't think that Braindead Roar would be able to defeat the Black Dragon's mother at all. The Deathwing family was a rather difficult existence to deal with, and who knew how many players had been traumatized by it in the past. Onyxia's deep breaths, Nefarian's five-colored rock-paper-scissors, Sinestra's yo-yos, and the mighty Death Wing actually split and attacked multiple times. However, Duque still gave Onyxia a death order. If she saw her mother charging over, she had to run without another word, even if she had to abandon Theramore. Duque didn't want to lose a well-tamed female black dragon. At this time, Tyrant sent a message. "Come quickly, Duque." As expected, Ragnaros's target is Mount Hyjal. Mount Hyjal had been the holy land of the Night Elves for tens of thousands of years. Even during the third battle at the Dark Portal, they had to give up a large part of the forest in order to kill Archimonde, and almost the entire mountain was blown up. Even so, the elves didn't completely give up on Mount Hyjal. A large number of druids stayed on Mount Hyjal, hoping to restore the holy mountain, which had been mostly destroyed by the explosion, to its original state. It didn't matter if it took 100, 1,000, or 10,000 years. Anyway, even if they lost their endless life, the Night Elves were still a race with terrifying longevity. Chapter 1787. Because the Land of Fire had descended. Chromatus was a perfect multicolored dragon. He had 5 different heads, and each head had the special power of a dragon. His appearance reminded Duque of the true multicolored fish egg powder. Unfortunately, in the Cataclysm, their grand 1,000-year plan was destined to face the most severe challenge. Be it our duty or the policies of the Sleeping Dragon Temple, they did not place Mount Hyjal as a priority area to defend. However, Mount Hyjal has a special meaning to me and the entire Night Elves. It symbolizes the inheritance of nature's harmonious will. If possible, I do not want Mount Hyjal to experience a second destruction. Most importantly, I saw many things in the dream. It is very likely that you, Duque, have seen those things as well. Duque did not care about Malfurion's feelings. He carefully looked at the data flowing down from the system on his retina. Azeroth seems to be resisting the integration of the fire elemental plane. That is the unconscious resistance of the planet's will. This will not buy too much time. 10 days, at most half a month. However, in the history of the game, there was no appearance of this strange dragon that looked like a patchwork monster. At this moment, what the elves on Mount Hyjal heard was not the sound of the collapsing southern foothills, but the sound of the Land of Fire. Isra looked like an elf in military attire, but she did the human court etiquette. She pressed her hands lightly on her abdomen and bowed to Duque. "Duque, I am very sorry. I am afraid I will have to trouble you again this time." Suddenly, Isra noticed that Duque's gaze seemed to be focused on the 2 green lines on her face. Night Elves like to paint their faces, and Duque naturally did not like those messy things. The corner of Duque's mouth rose. The so-called Twilight Judgment destroyed everything? That was a terrible and boring dream. Isra's tone was obviously heavier towards the end. "Lord Isra." Tyrant and Malfurion bowed at the same time. Sound was transmitted by vibration. If the space collapsed and the vibration could not be transmitted, then it was a different matter. That was a very strange scene. How much longer? Tyrant, Malfurion, and the other Night Elves were the most nervous. In the Alliance, the person with the most authority on spatial studies was none other than Duque. Soon, Isra focused all his attention on Duque. In this level of spatial collision, the side with the smaller spatial composition was directly annihilated. Clearly sensing Duque's slight displeasure, Isra tilted his head slightly and smiled, then the lines on his face disappeared instantly. With that, Duque waved his hand, and a 3D topographic map of Mount Hyjal appeared in front of him. Duque flipped his finger, and a red line cut the entire mountain range into 2. To the north of the red line, there was another blue line. In the Night Elves, Isra's position was extremely high. He was even higher than Alexstrasza, who gave the world tree life, and Nozdormu, who gave the Night Elves eternal life. Understood. Malfurion noticed that Tyrant was holding Duque's hand tightly when she asked Duque. He sighed quietly. Duque nodded slightly as a sign of respect. After all, they were both demigods. Who knew that Isra had a completely different explanation? They were slightly surprised, but not nervous. Isra was not only Cenarius's adoptive mother, but also the true teacher of the Druids. At this time, a wave of psychedelic colors began to ripple in the air around the three of them. In fact, even though the outer shell of the world tree was charred black with no leaves left and only a pile of bare branches, a powerful druid could still feel the existence of life just by touching the trunk. The emerald-green spatial door that looked like a blooming flower opened, and a creature with green hair and the appearance of a night elf stepped out. The intricate dragon horns on her head revealed her identity as a dragon. The sound did not correspond to the effect, and it gave people a very confused feeling. It was obvious that the Firelands and the main plane of Azeroth hadn't completely merged yet. The intermittent sound of the flames was the best proof. Nordrassil was the best example. If the descent of the Wind God throne was like a city in the sky descending, and the tidal throne merged with the Azeroth plane because it was in the deep sea, it was even more silent. The descent of the Land of Fire was incomparably domineering. Hello, Duque. Hello, Tyrant, Malfurion. Isra habitually closed her eyes, a faint smile on her doll-like face. She nodded at the three of them as a sign of acknowledgement. Duque deliberately made his words vague. He did not know what the Azeroth plane would be like in this life. Duque shrugged and pouted, unconcerned. Everyone who is called a hero by the people is working hard to change the fate of destruction. This is why we are called heroes. As long as they had perseverance and could continuously strengthen the ranks of the Druids, they would definitely achieve this goal one day. Ultimate Transformation Spell was so willful and convenient. Medivh had once said, "The earth will eventually heal its wounds." This world tree was slowly recovering. The red line is a dangerous area. We must retreat as soon as possible. The blue line is a warning area. It is best not to go there without the awareness of sacrifice. Everything will wait until the space stabilizes. She didn't open her eyes, but it was a strange feeling, as if she was staring at Duke with rapt attention. It was Isra. In the original history, Isra saw the future in a dream. When the Twilight Judgment came, the dragons would all die at the hands of Cromartis. And every dragon king would die beside the Wormrest temple. Even the corpse of Deathwing was stuck at the top of the temple. Duque felt much better on the spot. It had nothing to do with his identity. It was purely because Isra was taking care of him. It made him feel better. Got it. The two night elf leaders promised. Huff. 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 It sounded like the sound of bellows in an old blacksmith shop, but opposite this sound was the collapse of the entire Mount Hyjal. No, it's not that simple. That was because I had seen 3 dreams. One was the Twilight Judgment, but it was not completely destructive in that half-baked judgment. The other was the end of the dragons. I don't want to talk about this dream. But the third dream was different. I saw you, Duke Marcus, affecting the entire world line. This was the fusion of space. Because the original history and the history in the game obviously diverged. Chapter 1788. The corners of Isra's mouth curled into a charming smile. The aura of the dream around her clearly expressed that she did not believe a word you said, but she maintained a polite smile on her face. Yes. But you're the only one I've seen who can directly affect the entire timeline. Isra tilted her head adorably. Although this did not match her sexy female elf persona, it was still quite cute. Is that so? Oh, ha ha ha. What else could Duque say? He kept laughing awkwardly and politely. Isra's face got closer. She looked serious, and her hands were crossed in front of her chest like she was praying devoutly. For a moment, Duque had the urge to flirt with her. In my original dream, the 5-colored guardian dragons were missing the earth because of Nesario's betrayal. I once had a hunch that the former chief, Thrall, would be the key. The power of the earth that he controlled was likely to fill our gap. And then? I woke up from my dream because I realized that Thrall's existence was not necessary. With Onyxia's addition, the magic array formed by the pentashade dragon aspect could not be said to be perfect, but it was still quite smooth. So I entered the dream again. At this moment, I saw a dream that foreshadowed a different future. You saved us, the guardian dragons, one by one. Even if. There was another half of the sentence that Isra did not say, and that was, even if we lost the power bestowed by the Titans. Changing the topic slightly, Isra held Duque's hand with both hands. If possible, I am willing to bet everything on you, on a better future. Unfortunately, I don't have anything that you want. I'm just sorry that this time, this responsibility that should have belonged to us has been forcibly separated and placed on you. Duque smiled, not noticing that Isra had already scanned his mind. It's okay, we're all old acquaintances. Anyway, my future is in Azeroth, and I am also a self-proclaimed guardian. Otherwise, the will of the planet would not have given me such high authority and upper limit. If there's anything you need, just tell me. Isra smiled very sincerely and sweetly, as if thousands of pear trees were blooming. I have awakened. I realized that there was more I could do for the world than my duty. I hope to organize a powerful team of guardians called Guardian Hyjal, to protect the safety of the world. Oh. Duque wasn't surprised, but he had to act like tyrant. Due to the shaking of the foundation of the world, the Emerald Dream and the plane of the real world have been pulled closer. If I can get the help of more mortals, I can try to speed up the return of the demigods, including Cenarius. Cenarius? Tyrant and Malfurion exclaimed simultaneously. Isra had spoken her thoughts clearly. The true demigods of Azeroth were immortal beings. As long as the situation was right, they could be resurrected. There were 4 initial targets. The first was Goldring. Goldring was a demigod wolf god in the world of Azeroth. Goldring had killed countless demons in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. He only stopped fighting when he was exhausted. However, he didn't die and was one of the few demigods who survived. After that, Goldring still wandered the wilderness. His power was the reason for the curse of the werewolves, even though it wasn't his intention. After the cataclysm, the latest news was that the Twilight Hammer seemed to be trying to use other evil gods to replace Goldring. By the way, he was called Garrosh on the other side of the tribe. Yes, when Varian was a death gladiator in the Hammer of Misfortune, he had inherited the name of the Ghost Wolf. In a sense, Varian could even be said to be Goldring's son. The second was Arwenna, the messenger of the moon god. The mother of mercy, Arwenna, who was revered by the people, was a crow on Garnier, the mother tree in the world of Azeroth. Before the ancient war, Elun had taken a fancy to her and sent her to deliver a message to the demigod Cenarius. Not long after, as Arwenna also directly delivered messages to the other demigods, her honesty and speed were praised by everyone. In return, the demigods gave her more abilities to help her complete her mission faster and better. In the end, Arwenna herself became an existence like them, a demigod. When the Night Elves discovered the Well of Eternity and settled nearby, Arwenna transformed into a Night Elf. As one of the members of her race, she studied the magic power of the well water with them. However, Queen Azhara built her own temple and gathered a large number of servants to greedily absorb the magic power of the Well of Eternity. Arwenna soon realized the terrible effects of misusing magic, so she returned to Elun's side. During the ancient war, Arwenna would sometimes transform into the image of a mortal race to guide the humans or night elves who were being chased by the Doomsday Guards and help them escape danger. However, most of the time, she would hover in the sky and scout, providing Cenarius with intelligence on the Burning Legion. Ronan, who had participated in the transmigration, witnessed Arwena's fall. The Doomsday Guards discovered Arwena, who was active at the front lines. A large number of demons focused on attacking the demigod's messenger. The Doomsday Guard's spears eventually pierced through Arwena's body. Blood splattered on the ground, and the Burning Legion demons that came into contact with Arwena's blood all fell. However, Ronan did not know that although the mother tree, Garnier, gradually withered, Arwena survived. She once again flew across the battlefield. The news of the wild boar god Agamagam fighting two powerful void lords alone, crushing numerous apocalypse guards even as it fell to the ground, the bear monster brothers User and Yusak being assassinated by a mana prowler, the white deer Malorn fighting alongside the dryad and falling to the ground alone was sent to Cenarius in a timely manner, and the news finally flew to the moon god's residence. The third was the turtle demigod Tortola, whom the modern night elves did not know much about. As for the fourth, it was the forest demigod Cenarius, who was the center of attention. As a demigod who was hacked to death by Lord Roar's axe, Cenarius, in a sense, was quite pitiful. He did not know if Lord Roar had a fixed damage increase of 1000% against four-legged centaurs. In any case, he would kill every four-legged, humanoid creature he hacked to death. Especially since Lord Roar had now joined Duque's side. Once they met again, the situation would be quite awkward. However, Duque, who was a troublemaker, would not let such a scene go. However, it sounded like Isra wanted to do something big. Chapter 1789. I hope to resurrect all the gods of the wilderness who died in the War of the Ancients as soon as possible, Isra said to Duque. The god of the wilderness was a very broad term. A long, long time ago, in the vast world of Azeroth, there was a group of magical creatures. Most of them appeared in animal form, but they didn't need to experience life and death like ordinary creatures. Their abilities surpassed mortal creatures, and they even became the object of worship for some races. They were the gods of the wilderness. All the gods of the wilderness were demigods. Their essence was the powerful essence of life, representing life and nature. Their bodies existed in the material world, and their souls were bound in the Emerald Dream by Odur's guardian, Freya. In the ancient war, in addition to the 4 demigods mentioned above, there were actually more than 24 demigods. The more famous ones included the boar god Agamagan, the bear brothers Ushuk and User, and the black panther demigod Amantha. Naturally, the most famous was the white deer god Malorn. In ancient times, Malorn was like an outstanding diplomat of his race. He could always resolve all kinds of conflicts. Legend has it that Malorn's magic power was boundless, but he never abused it. He was elegant, wise, magnanimous, and tolerant, using his love for the world of Azeroth to maintain its peace and tranquility. Before the War of the Ancients. Whenever the world or the Night Elf civilization faced danger, Malorn the Wayfarer would appear in the form of a giant white deer to help the Night Elves. Although he had powerful magic, he never appeared in other forms. Malorn often strolled along the road of Azeroth, resolving all kinds of wars and disputes in his own way. He had avoided 2 civil wars among the Night Elves. In the War of the Ancients, Cenarius asked Malorn and the other demigods of Azeroth to participate in the war against the Burning Legion. After a heated debate, Cenarius convinced them to join forces under the command of Jared Shadowsong, who led the Night Elf army and other creatures against the Burning Legion. In order to save his son Cenarius, Malorn used his great power to charge at the Burning Legion alone and engulfed the demon army. Seeing that Malorn was gradually flattening his army, Archerons rushed out to fight Malorn in order to prevent his army from being completely destroyed. White Deer, who had used up a lot of energy in the previous battle, attacked him with all his might, but Archimonde used his powerful evil power to defeat Malorn and break his neck. Duque had eaten a whale. He knew that the dragon race had a huge appetite, and this whale-eating method was quite shocking to him. As the saying goes, you can't become fat in one bite. Duque felt that this saying was quite reasonable. If it was done step by step, he would raise all 5 limbs in approval. What troubled Duque the most was that Isra had set his sights on him. Duque, I know that reviving so many demigods in one go is indeed a huge project. If it's you, you should have a way, Isra said. Duque rolled his eyes. F***ck, you can't even say it's daytime. Or is this a test? Duque shook his head deeply. I'm sorry. Perhaps many beings see me as a prophet, as a guide. In reality, I'm not omniscient. No one is like that. Nosdormu can't, just like the titans of the pantheon didn't expect Sargeras to betray them. I only specialize in my own field. Clearly, reviving demigods isn't my forte. I see. Isra seemed a little disappointed. Duque bowed slightly. If there's anything I can help with, I'll do my best. I'm sorry if it's beyond my abilities. Especially Malorn. As the strongest demigod of the wilderness, reviving him requires a lot of power, and natural power at that. Although I've dabbled in that aspect, I don't think it's something that you and I can do directly. Why don't we set a small goal first, like reviving Cenarius, whose power is far inferior to his? Isra pulled himself together again, a simple and elegant smile with a hint of sweetness on his face. I was rash. In that case, who do you think should we revive first? Goldrin. Duque said without hesitation. All right. And so, Duque, Isra, Tyrant, and Malfurion began to discuss how to revive these demigods. Some demigods had indeed died in the ancient war. Some hadn't. The so-called revival of the demigods who hadn't died was more like a return to the source of their power. Isra said, Goldrin didn't die, but his soul seems to have split. We have to find his main body first. Malfurion frowned. I received news that the Twilight Hammer is afraid of Goldrin's power. They don't want to see Garrosh return to the world. So they summoned their own wolf god, an existence that was distorted and misunderstood by their will. In reality, they used this non-existent spiritual body to contaminate Goldrin's main body, so that he would enter the ranks of the evil gods. Tyrant continued, are you talking about the corrupted, frenzied Wolverine Soth? Yes. However, I don't know how to lure this frenzied Wolverine Soth out. Duque suddenly clapped his hands and laughed. That's easy. The original method in the game was naturally for the players to find those werewolves who were desecrating the holy altar of Garrosh, kill them, obtain a batch of special incense, and then lure out frenzied Wolverine Soth. However, the Land of Fire had yet to officially merge with Azeroth, and the Twilight Hammer's operation had yet to begin. If they wanted to bring Goldrin back in advance, they would have to use special methods. As soon as Duque opened the portal, the people on the other side were shocked. Then, Duque called out, Come, my king, there's a small matter that I need you to run. This. I'm in the middle of a military conference. But all right. At the next moment, everyone on Mount Hyjal saw the helpless William and the other two. When Duque told William about this, William's heart suddenly jumped strangely. It was a kind of joy that seemed to yearn to return to the source. When he was in the Hammer of Misfortune, he was always respectfully called Garrosh by the orcs. However, when he had the opportunity to personally interact with this wolf demigod, he felt a sense of familiarity, as if he had met his father. Duque patted William's shoulder affectionately. William, although the power of frenzied Wolverine Soth is nothing compared to Goldrin's main body, this beast must be eliminated first. But he had to destroy this beast first before the real Goldring could return. Isra has already sensed the location of that thing. Go to the throat of Lycansoth in the east of here. As long as you go in, this beast will come out on its own. Get rid of it and free Goldrin's soul. Chapter 1790. William had completely matured. As he grew older and had more battle experience, he was the majestic and authoritative king of Stormwind in front of almost everyone. In the eyes of the people and soldiers, William's bravery and achievements had completely surpassed that of his father, Lang. In many battles, William had proven his strength and ability to command troops. At the same time, because the Marcus family supported the economy of Stormwind, a certain titular duke who had environmental awareness and modern economic knowledge made the kingdom truly prosperous. These 2 points made everyone have a unanimous evaluation of William, a holy king that only appeared once in 1,000 years. Regardless of whether he was a holy king or not, the relationship between William and Duque was rather complicated. In terms of seniority, Duque was of the same generation as William's father and uncle Anjouan Lothar, whom he admired the most. Duque was indeed active before he became a minor. Even though Duque was only 7 or 8 years older than him, which was not even half a generation, William still had to call Duque uncle. In terms of status in the mortal world, William was a king, while Duque still had the title of Grand Duke of Stormwind. The problem was that no one would mention this title again. The queens of the 4 kingdoms were all going to marry Duque at the same time. How could they come to Stormwind to be duchesses? Sorry, the pond was too small to hold so many big fish. In terms of power in the kingdom, Duque was not only outstanding, but also extremely powerful. Think about it. If it were a normal king, he would have a duke who was a demigod, a bunch of demigods, and hundreds of thousands of troops, an army of millions of foreign races, including insects, nagas, murlocs, and so on. How could a king sleep well? In the past, Lang had thought of separating from Duque, and William had once thought that it might be a good thing. Now that the alliance's economy was integrated, how could they be separated so easily? The Marcus family's territory, or in other words, its jurisdiction included the East Elven Forest, the East Twilight Forest, the Reedridge Mountain, the Swamp of Sorrow, and the Headwind Path. Many lands that were once considered barren were now producing large amounts of minerals, which were the mainstays of Stormwind's industry. If the Marcus family were to be separated, then how would they go to the Watch Castle in the Cursed Land? Most importantly, without Duque, Stormwind would no longer be the leader of the Alliance. To be the boss of such a strong organization like the Alliance, there were so many benefits. Moreover, Duque himself was an immortal demigod. Not only him, but even Queen Sylvanas was a demigod. Perhaps Jaina would also embark on the path of demigods in the future. Did he really have to offend a whole family of demigods? After thinking about it, William and his courtiers came to a conclusion: let's just make do with it. If it was appropriate, he could simply merge the Wurine family and the Marcus family through marriage. The poor little Prince Anjouan Wurine still didn't know that his father had already plotted to make him a bachelor dog until Annihilus Marcus grew up. Originally, William had always been very conflicted when he met Duque. In public, William would call Duque Commander-in-Chief, and when there were no outsiders, he would call him Duque. As for Duque calling him William, he was also happy to accept it. But now that he was a newbie to Duque and was ordered to do the task of running errands and killing small monsters, William was in a bind. Yet, Duque still had his lifeline, because that was his Goldrun, which was also Garrosh. William had inherited Lang's terrible bloodline, which was considered second-rate. Yet, he was able to explode and rise to become the Alliance's top berserker in one go. This had a great deal to do with Garrosh's soul inheritance. If he could gain the recognition of the real wolf god, his strength might even be able to take a leap and become a demigod. After understanding his own situation, William could only pinch his nose and accept it. Goldrun has done me a great favor, and it's my wish to liberate his soul. I'll go back to Stormwind to hand over some state affairs. I'll go now. Do well. The smelly Duque put on the airs of an elder and encouraged William, making Tyrant want to laugh but not dare to. Since Magni wasn't around, William was already the number 2 figure in the alliance, but he was like a grandson in front of Duque. Even though he knew that Duque had the intention of teasing him, William had no choice but to jump into this pit. He really didn't know if this was a sign that he was going to be under Duque's control for the rest of his life. After getting rid of William, the next topic of discussion was naturally the crow demigod Avi. Oh, Avina. I used to blame that damned input method when I played games in the past. In the end, I ended up typing her name into this. It's a sin, a sin. Duque didn't have any special plans or arrangements for this crow demigod. After all, these resurrected demigods weren't too strong. Although they weren't as strong as those wilderness demigods who didn't even leave their names behind, they were actually not as good as Onyxia. She was a strong support for mortals, but she was at most a bonus for Duque. Anyway, they just had to kill Cecilia, the Twilight Dragon, who wasn't even considered a boss. Out of the idea of training the younger generation or guiding them, Duque directly threw this task to Lucia, Sally Whitemane, Mara Fordragon, and some other second-rate powerhouses. If a group of girls learned to ride the hippogriffs that Avina had inherited, it would be quite pleasing to the eye. As for the tortoise demigod, Tortola, he was actually one of the few demigods who had survived the ancient war. Because this war had consumed too much of his energy, he chose to live in seclusion in Mount Hyjal. This sleep lasted for as long as 10,000 years, and he didn't even wake up during the Third War until the Cataclysm woke him up. The funny thing was that because he had just woken up and wasn't ready, Tortola was subdued and imprisoned by the Twilight Hammer. Now, the task of this empty shell, guardian of Hyjal, that Isra had set up was to rescue him. Duke knew that Tortola, who had been rescued, would not only personally assist everyone in fighting against the Fire Elemental Legion, but even his children would also step forward to do their part. But as an old player, Duque knew how annoying Tortola's annoying sons and grandsons were. Forget it. Such a troublesome task would be left to Lena Thunderspear and the other newbies. Summoning the short and fat female dwarf paladin Lena and the others, Duque deceived them with a serious face. The Cataclysm has happened, and the Alliance and even the whole of Azeroth are facing another life and death crisis. In the name of the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, I give you a sacred task: let the Tortoise Demigod, who fought against the Burning Legion in the ancient war and fell into a state of weakness for 10,000 years, return. The newbies, who didn't know that Duque was only throwing the task to them because he was afraid of trouble, were all excited by the encouragement from the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, the legendary hero Duque. They couldn't wait to go to the battlefield the next moment. Chapter 1791. We'll definitely complete the mission. Lena and the others were extremely excited. On the side, Isra, who still had his eyes closed, chuckled after they left. Duque, you're not very kind. Why do I feel like you've foreseen all the future and made the corresponding arrangements? You even optimized the allocation of manpower. Duque immediately exclaimed in his heart. Women, oh, it's not good for a female dragon to be so smart. Look at how smart Onyxia is. She immediately went offline after following me. Isn't she a dumb dragon with dumb luck now? Duque would never admit this. The enemy hasn't come out yet. Of course I have to reserve some mobile troops and a certain number of strong people to deal with emergencies. It was a very fair and reasonable statement, but Isra looked like he had Duque in the bag. Reviving Cenarius is my and Malfurion's mission. Reviving so many forest gods is a heavy burden, even for me. Then, can I ask you, Duque, to help purify the Bear brothers Ushuk and User? They seem to have been revived again, and then there's a problem. I don't know where they are now. User was a shaman caster, while Ushuk was a warrior who excelled at using fangs and claws. When the two worked together in battle, their combination of strength and magic could quickly eliminate any enemies that blocked their way. User and Ushuk were the protectors of all beasts and people who believed in the balance of nature. The brothers' most loyal followers were bear monsters, whose magic tradition came from user shamanism. Some bear monsters inherited Ushuk's style of wood carvings and architecture. The Timbermaw Fortress in the north of Fellwood Forest was an example. The entrance to the fortress was a huge, roaring bear's head carved out of wood, a sign of respect for the twin bear brothers. The night elves were also followers of the bear brothers User and Ushuk. They dedicated their lives to the immortals and obtained the form of a bear, the Claw Druid. Every druid who followed the path of the bear had to go through a ritual to communicate with the soul of the giant bear in the Moonlight Forest. The followers of the twins had always looked forward to the day when they would find the casques of their ancestors or the wooden carvings of their patron. In this life, the bear monsters living near the world tree Vordrasil in the Grizzly Hills had indeed begun to replant the broken Vordrasil. They had intended to resurrect the great bear god Ushuk who had died in the ancient war. In the end, Ushuk was resurrected by the bear monsters, but it was precisely because the ancestors of the night elves planted the world tree, Vordrasil, that their roots were so deep that they even reached the lair of the ancient god Yogg-Saron. The dark power of the ancient gods began to leak. The druids were afraid that Vordrasil would cause a great disaster, so they destroyed the world tree. The result of his resurrection was naturally that Ushuk had been contaminated by the ancient god. With the help of the adventurers, some of the bear monsters used the purified dust of Vordrasil to purify Ushuk. But what happened next was rather interesting. He really didn't know if he should say that the bear monsters were awesome, or that the bear monster brothers' soul abilities were awesome. Before attacking Otter, Ushuk had experienced a failed resurrection, and his soul was purified and returned to the Emerald Dream. In less than a year, the bear monsters actually had a resurrection ritual again. This time, they resurrected two brothers at once. Then, for some reason, something went wrong again. Thinking of this, Duque couldn't help but touch his chin. Interesting. After estimating the difficulty, Duque agreed and only raised a question. What if I reach a certain degree of cooperation with the brothers? Duque's words were very vague, but Isra seemed to have expected it. She smiled slightly. We, the dragon aspect, have the same goal as you, Duque. There has never been any division between us. Since we have to rely on your power to resurrect the bear monster brothers, if they choose to become your servants, there is nothing wrong with that. We respect the choice of every spirit of nature and god of the wilderness. Isra added. Also, I'm worried that the Ushuk brothers may have been contaminated by an unknown soul, and resurrection of them may not be successful. There may even be the possibility that they have become evil gods. If such an unfortunate event occurs, you will also need to suppress it. So, I'll leave everything to you. Sigh. As expected of a good and understanding girl. Oh, what a good dragon. Duque's thoughts suddenly became active. Frankly speaking, the configuration of his demigod team was indeed a bit biased. There were many long-range fighters, few melee fighters, and they were unreliable. Originally, there was still the Sword Emperor who could help, but now the Gemini were temporarily defeated, and Duque had yet to find a way to resurrect them. Onyxia only liked to fight hand-to-hand with enemies that were weaker than her. Now, there was a bunch of demigods, but they ended up meeting a demigod who was strong in melee combat. His side was in a complete mess, unable to display their combat power. The most obvious example was the last time they fought Arthas. Although the two fools were very strong, the Black Dragon, Queen Sylvanas, and Gavashki, three demigods who were not weak, could not even fight the two fools in a short period of time. It was a huge embarrassment. Now that Isra had opened the door, Duque naturally accepted it. The Land of Fire was currently merging with the main plane of Azeroth. It was said that there was still some time before it would happen, but the problem was that no one dared to guarantee when Ragnaros' subordinates and the blind believers of Twilight would launch an all-out attack. Duque had never set his sights on the Bear Brothers because Duque knew that the god of the wilderness was unruly and difficult to tame, and they were a faction of their own. As the leader of the Logia faction, nothing he did would be for nothing. If he worked so hard to resurrect them, and then ran away with a word of thanks, where would he put his face? Deep down, Duque was still a player who would not get up without benefits. Now it was different. The Logia faction only had the three leaders, Malorn the White Deer, his son Cenarius, and Isra who raised Cenarius. Isra nodded. Even if the other two didn't like it, they could only pinch their noses and accept it. Moreover, Duque was very clear that if there were no accidents, Ushak should have fallen at this point in time. Even if his soul was purified, he would not be too strong after returning. Reconstructing the divine body of a demigod was never an easy task. Isra had to resurrect 4 demigods in one go, and even hoped to resurrect Malorn. Without using up all the energy accumulated in Mount Hyjal and the Emerald Dream, there was absolutely no hope of completing it. Rather than that, it was better to let the landlord surnamed Du have it. Duque, who had clearly profited, righteously expressed his willingness to fight for the future and peace of Azeroth while opening the portal and going straight to work. For others, finding the Bear Brothers was like looking for a needle in a haystack. As for Duque, pretending to think, he directly opened the portal to the Amber Pinewood camp in Grizzly Hills in Northrend. Chapter 1792. Half a year ago, a great war between the living and the undead ended. The once bustling North region returned to peace. Although the Alliance still had more than 50,000 soldiers in Northrend, everyone knew that only the guards were left. The main force of the Alliance had already withdrawn. The Fearless Fortress was left on the western front, and Stormwind opened up Ziyuan County to exploit the mineral resources there. Of course, most of the land in the North Wind Taiga was still used as a hunting ground for the Blue Dragons. The Eastern Alliance had slightly more troops. The Dwarf General Fandral Thunderspear and the Lordaeran General Brigida Bendis occupied the Howling Fjord and Grizzly Hills on behalf of the two countries. In general, the mines belonged to the bronze-bearded dwarves, while the plains and highlands belonged to Lordaeran. It was interesting for General Thunderspear to come here because there would be no more Alterac Mountains battlefield in this life. As for Bridget, it was purely because she wanted to change her mood. A man she admired had disappeared at the same time as her father. Staying in Lordaeran, she would always think of him. On the surface, the three countries of the Alliance had taken an enclave, but no one knew what would happen in the future. As one of the 3 warmer areas in Northrend, the resources here were actually not bad. Because of the continuous wars, and the great cataclysm that had just ended, the Alliance did not have much energy to focus on the development here. The only ones who did their best were the Night Elf Druids. Amber Pinewood Camp was a camp built on the side of a large river. The rapid river could send huge logs from the Blue Sky sawmill downstream to the Bay of Risk in the southwest of Grizzly Hills, where they would be loaded onto ships. Then, they would be sent to places in Northrend that needed wood. Once upon a time, the higher-ups of the Alliance thought of selling the wood here to Orgrimmar, which lacked wood. Later, because of Gurisa's rise to power, the Alliance and the Horde stopped trading. Although the Pinewood Camp belonged to Stormwind City, many druids used it as a base to explore the entire Grizzly Hills. When an unauthorized portal broke through Pinewood Camp's solidified space barrier, it caused panic among the guards, but when Duke's figure appeared in front of everyone quieted down and saluted Duke with the Alliance's military salute. "Is Teacher Syrian here?" Duque asked softly. A female night elf with shoulder-length white hair and large face lines on her face walked out. "I am Syrian, but in front of Sir Marcus, who is known as the Alliance's mentor, I am ashamed. I don't deserve to be called a teacher." Duque smiled like a spring breeze. "Everyone has their own specialties. I'm only the commander of the Alliance, but in terms of restoring nature, you druids are the teachers of all the Alliance." Duque's humility made many people, including Syrian, feel very comfortable. "I wonder what business Sir Marcus has here." Have you heard from Ushik and User recently? The elven tutor suddenly became excited. Have the higher-ups of the Alliance finally received my report? Oh my god. I've been typing my report for 3 months. Fortunately, Sir Marcus has personally come to deal with this matter. That's right. The Bear Brothers were demigods. A powerful demigod should be dealt with by a demigod. I actually thought that the Alliance would need to form another hero group. Duque broke into a cold sweat. This was his fault. In fact, he should have seen Ushik's report. To be more precise, his system elf had seen it. The problem was that Duque, who was waiting for the cataclysm to happen, had secretly lowered the priority of everything in Northrend to the lowest level. This meant that unless an important stronghold was attacked, the system elf did not need to remind Duque about anything in Northrend. After all, in Duque's view, Northrend had the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the new Lich King, Uther, overseeing it. So, Duque did not care. He just took a few glances, allocated some resources, and fooled around with his maid. Of course, since Syrian mentioned it, Duque easily found Syrian's report in the system's saved file. Duque replied confidently, "It can't be helped. In your report and the other reports, there is no direct evidence that the demigod Bear Brothers have been resurrected, and there are no eyewitnesses. If it wasn't for your recent report that the bear monsters around Vorderthil are getting more and more violent, and they are constantly fighting each other and endangering the surrounding environment, such as the wooden house in Amber Pine Forest. The Alliance has invested a lot of troops in this, but the number of incoherent injured people is increasing. Neither the Alliance's staff nor I will pay attention to what's happening here." Syrian immediately became discouraged. "I'm sorry, Sir Commander. It was indeed our investigation that failed. It's okay. I'm here because of this. The Land of Fire is descending on Mount Hyjal. If we can add another demigod in time, it will be a good thing." Syrian pondered for a moment. "I'm not sure about Ushik and Uther. But I can say with certainty that part of the bear monsters in Grizzly Hills have been contaminated again. This once peaceful race is now divided into 2 factions. One faction supports Ushik, and the other supports Uther. They are actually killing each other. You should know that the god they worship is a brother who fought alongside them in the ancient war. Do you have any suggestions? I suggest that you look for Ushik's children. Osorn is in the Temple of Raging Teeth in the east of here, and Kotian is in the Temple of Blood Fury further east. Perhaps you can get more information about the Bear Brothers from them." Of course, Duque knew the entire process of Ushik's resurrection quest, but he could forget about it now. That was not the case at all. He came to Pinewood Camp to look for Syrian. Firstly, he had indeed received her report, and secondly, she was the initiator of Ushik's quest in the game. If he looked for her, who had been paying attention to the bear monsters, he would definitely get twice the result with half the effort. That was indeed the case. Through Syrian, Duque obtained the exact coordinates of the 2 temples. Duque went straight to them. He was a little surprised to find that Ushik's children were together in the Temple of Raging Teeth. Osorn was a big white bear, and Kotian was a big brown bear. Well, they were just a little bit bigger. They were about the size and tonnage of a 50-ton medium tank. Duque easily found out about the Bear Brothers. So it was the Timbermaw bear monster's fault. To be precise, it was the actions of the Alliance and the Horde that provoked the Timbermaw bear monster. This involved a bear monster named Thor Rageclaw. Chapter 1793. In the world of Azeroth, there were actually quite a number of intelligent creatures. Sometimes, it was just like that. Races with higher intelligence and a larger population would often occupy an absolute ruling position. For example, on Earth, before Duque crossed over, humans had already unified the world. Any other species of creatures were only fit to enter zoos. Among the three known continents, apart from the Pandaria continent, which was located south of the Endless Sea, the Alliance, the Horde, and the Dragons gradually occupied the absolute dominant positions of these three continents. The Dragons only cared about their own territory. This made it very difficult for the other intelligent races that did not join the Alliance and the Horde. For example, the Centaurs, who were once active in the southern part of Durotar, were almost extinct and had to migrate to the wilderness of the Barren Lands to survive. In the Razor Highlands in the southern part of the Barren Lands, the Boarmen were also killed by the orcs. If it wasn't for the cataclysm that attracted the brain-dead Howl and the main force of the Horde, the Boarmen would probably have been killed to extinction. Therefore, the second-tier races such as the Bear Monsters and the Boarmen were in an awkward position, but they also desperately wanted to increase their strength. Because of the Bear Monsters' relationship with Urso, the Night Elves had always allowed a group of Bear Monsters to live in Timbermaw Fortress in the northern part of the Fellwood Forest. After all, many elven druids still had to learn how to become a bear from a claw druid. The Horde did not have this scruple. After all, the Bear Monsters did not join the Alliance, so they were targets. After Dranos Salyafar became the new leader of the Forsaken, he chose to rebuild the new Undercity. At the same time, he also led his men to attack all the living in Winterspring. After Dumuk had people throw a magic bomb into the new underworld city, the goblins of Winterspring Valley's perpetual moon town chose to evacuate. Now, there were no other intelligent races to hinder the expansion of the Forgotten Ones. This made the life of the Timbermaw Bear Monsters even more difficult. This was almost equivalent to the Timbermaw Bear Monsters fighting a mutated version of the Scourge army. Thor Rageclaw chose to resurrect the demigod bear monsters again, and two at once. His idea was good, and it was supported by the rest of the bear monster clans in Grizzly Hills. They also learned their lesson this time and used the purified dust of Vordrasil as a material to summon Urso and Urso. His intentions were good. But the naive bear monsters didn't expect that Twilight believers had already filled every intelligent race, including the bear monsters. Since Enzos could make Savi's corrode Fandral stag helm, why couldn't he tempt some bear monsters with low intelligence? Everything was well prepared, but the animals used as resurrection sacrifices were all fed with corroded morning light oats. On the surface, these were all light element fodder. If one ate too much of it, the sacrifice's internal organs would all be marked with Enzos mark. That was why the demigod brother of the bear monster that was resurrected after exhausting the life force of Vordrasil, which had been broken into 3 parts, was still mentally ill. Ushek's son, Ao Lang, said, "Father and uncle, the brothers saw an illusion." He shouted that the other party was a monster whose soul had been corrupted by the demons of the Burning Legion. I'm afraid that their memories are still stuck in the ancient war from 10,000 years ago, where they saw a terrifying illusion. His daughter, Koshien, said, "The scariest thing is that almost all the bear monsters and giant bears with fathers and uncles' bloodline have been affected. They are frantically attacking their compatriots in the other camp." Because Grizzly Hills was once controlled by the Lich King's Scourge Legion, the plague still lingers in many places. We can see that many giant bears have fought to the death, but they are still dragging their immortal bodies to attack each other. Speaking up to here, the 2 big black bears shrunk back without feeling the cold. Duque touched his chin, and he began to understand Enzo's approach. Because Ushek's soul had already been purified once, forcibly contaminating Ushek's soul didn't show. The evil faction's method of making the righteous fall seemed to be the same after so many years, and that was the blood and souls of their loved ones. In order to make Arthas fall, Zul induced Arthas to have a mental breakdown and then killed his father and master. In order to make Nesario fall, Enzos first used the whispers of the ancient gods to drive Nesario crazy, and then made him betray his brothers and sisters. The fetters of family were great. After personally cutting off these fetters, the sense of guilt and depravity brought about was also the darkest. In order to make the 2 powerful gods of the wilderness fall, Enzos had put in quite a bit of effort. It seemed that it was about right. Taking advantage of the fact that the Emerald Dream was approaching and the demigod resurrection became easier, he first instructed the Twilight believers in the bear monsters to offer sacrifices with added ingredients to the bear monsters, and then manipulated their soul perception, treating them as demons of the Burning Legion. Once one side slaughtered too many of the other's children and grandchildren, or a winner was decided in a battle to the death between the brothers, then the victor would wake up in extreme fear and shock, realizing what a terrible thing he had done. At that time, whether it was Ushuk or Ushuk who fell to become an evil god, Enzos would benefit. Ha! What an unexpected development! Duque sneered. The big white bear, Ao Lang, had an extremely anthropomorphic expression on his bare face. Please, great demigod of the weave, Duke Marcus, I have seen my father's fall and loss of composure once again. The current Ushuk is no longer my great father, he must be sent to eternal slumber. The big brown bear, Koshien, also had a mournful expression. I had thought that purification would be enough to save my father. I was wrong. It was foolish to have such hopes. Great demigod, when you see my father and uncle, you will agree with me. If you see the torture my father has suffered again and again, that unparalleled darkness, you should have the same opinion as me. If their souls cannot rest in peace, then let them be annihilated. Seeing the two big bears in despair, Duque suddenly felt like laughing. What if I say that I still have a chance to save your father and uncle, and let them truly resurrect and join the righteous cause of fighting against evil? How will you thank me? Ushuk and his children were stunned. As the children of a demigod, they had long since surpassed the scope of ordinary living beings, and were through and through divine beings. They were not at the level of a demigod, but they could live for tens of thousands of years. They had long since become spirits. How could they not hear Duque's intention to extort them, or rather, to recruit them? Looking around, the entire Grizzly Hills had already become a territory controlled by the Alliance. If they did not know what was good for them, who knew if they would give the Alliance the chance to wipe them out? After all, many of their compatriots had already entered a state of madness. As long as you can save father and uncle, we are willing to become your servants, the siblings replied. Chapter 1794. Taking in bear monsters and giant bears as vassal races of the Alliance was purely Duque's impromptu idea. But it was also in line with the general trend of the world. This world didn't have the technology to fight cloning wars. Among the mainstream races, even humans and orcs, who had the shortest lifespans, needed more than 10 years to produce a new generation. The next, Legion strikes, would probably be less than 10 years away. To meet the needs of the upcoming war, the most basic method was to accept more large intelligent races. Just like in the beginning of World of Warcraft, the Alliance and the Horde each had only 4 races. In the end, both sides desperately expanded the number of races and developed more classes. Brainless Roar's method of attacking neutral races was, in a sense, cutting off his own path of retreat. Thrall had seen through this. Unless it was a race that couldn't be negotiated with, he wouldn't do anything to exterminate the intelligent races. The orcs were indeed powerful, but if they destroyed a large intelligent race this year and another the next year, what would the other races that joined the Horde think? Duque silently watched Brainless Roar court death and then waited for the right time to come. That was a bit off topic, but at this stage, Duque had to deal with the demigod bear brothers first. Led by Ao Lang and his sister, Duque came to the giant rock hills northeast of the Grizzly Hills. This was a very remote place. When they attacked the Scourge army, the Moon Creek Brigade under Stormwind was stationed on the open land southwest of this place. After Arthas' death, the camp was empty. Northrend was very big, no smaller than the Eastern Kingdom continent or the Kalimdor continent. It was such a big continent. Excluding the Dragon Clan's territory, it was a joke for more than 50,000 Alliance troops to control a new territory of millions of square kilometers. Even the so-called occupation was just a symbolic one. If any major forces were to attack, the Alliance army would only retreat to the Fearless Fortress and Utgard Castle, which were vital areas, and wait for reinforcements. The giant rock hills weren't a place patrolled by the Alliance's sentinels, so it was normal that the Alliance didn't know about it. As soon as he stepped on this hill that looked like a small plateau, Duque heard earth-shaking roars. That was not the roar of one or two giant bears. It was the roar of thousands of bear monsters and giant bears. The exaggerated sound waves seemed to have materialized. Even with the explosive tonnage of the two giant bears behind him, they couldn't help but stagnate in front of this terrifying sound waves. Duque knew something was wrong with one look. On this small plateau, there was a huge basin similar to the ancient Roman Colosseum. It was at least 2 kilometers in diameter at the top and no less than 1 kilometer at the bottom. The entire slope of the basin was filled with bear monsters and giant bears. They were like spectators in an arena, roaring loudly and cheering for the battle between the two behemoths in the arena. Obviously, the two giant bears that were the size of hills were the brothers Yusak and User. Mortals would not be able to see anything, but as a demigod who was adept at controlling the elements, how could Duque not see the blood-colored web in the air? It extended out from a shattered, pitch-black space and covered the basin below. At the bottom of the basin, it looked like a patch of green grass. But Duque could see that the raging fire elements were like cirrus clouds in the stratosphere, churning and surging. If one looked at the bottom of the basin, one would see that the shadow elements that reeked of blood had formed a whirlpool. It glowed with an ominous light while a huge and complicated magic formation that covered the entire bottom of the basin slowly rotated in an anti-clockwise direction. What was even more terrifying was that this dark magic formation was spread out in a place that mortals could not see. Under the feet of at least 30,000 bear monsters, it stretched out in all directions, extending into the endless darkness. Yet, not a single bear monster or giant bear noticed the abnormality here. They continued to roar in a frenzy, completely unaware that their life force had been soundlessly extracted, forming a mysterious glow in the air before being absorbed into the evil magic formation. How extravagant! Even Duque had to admit that the evil god Zoth was really creative. The world was too big. No matter how strong the alliance was, no matter how many experts there was a limit to how many places they could take care of. After failing to attack the alliance's important territory, he switched to encircling the city from the countryside. He accumulated strength in a corner that the alliance could not see, and when necessary, he would throw out all his cards in one go to crush the alliance. Duque could not help but recall that in history, be it Deathwing or Savi's, even if they had knelt down, Zoth had never jumped out to fight when his underlings were slapped in the face. In Azeroth, Enzos was definitely the most cunning. Lord Marcus. The big white bear, Ao Lang, asked nervously. Duque watched this scene quietly. Around him, the light of the magic net silently lit up, making his cheeks purple. If not for Duque's human appearance, he might have been mistaken for a Draenei. Atish, and Song of Light and Shadow, were clenched in his left and right hands respectively. His magic staff was pointed at the ground, and the tip of the sword drooped down. A golden line extended from the tip of the sword to the ground. The holy golden light was already overflowing, dripping drop by drop on the Boulder Hills grassland. Every drop of golden light flickered faintly. 3 different colored elements flowed in Duque's eyes. Blazing fire elements. Tranquil and serene frost elements. Mysterious and unfathomable arcane elements. Duque raised his right hand and flipped his wrist lightly. The atmosphere around him suddenly changed. Blizzard. Any Morning Star wizard could cast this spell. However, when a demigod used it, it was a true blizzard that affected the entire world. The temperature suddenly dropped. The frenzied bear monsters subconsciously looked at the sky that had been incomparably clear just a moment ago. At this time, the huge icicles as thick as a man's arm had already fallen from the sky. These icicles were like a sudden meteor shower, but each icicle was shining brightly under the golden light. Duque's short hair suddenly became long. It was not that his hair had inexplicably grown long, but that every strand of his hair had become a channel for him to communicate with the elements of heaven and earth. They extended from his head and connected to the void. It looked as if Duque had suddenly turned into a handsome man with long blue hair. Duque floated to the edge of the basin, ignoring the tens of thousands of bear monsters that were looking at him. He smiled and looked at his bear brothers at the bottom of the basin, countless green runes falling from his eyes like a waterfall. It was a final inspection of his demigod bear brothers, who were likely to become his new underlings. Chapter 1795. Above the vortex above the basin, there was an even larger arcane energy vortex that covered the blood-colored web like a pot lid. The arcane energy vortex spun slowly, and in its deepest depths, there were specks of golden light flashing continuously. Those specks of golden light seemed to be responding to their owner's thoughts. The light was like the sunlight that had shone on the Azeroth plains for thousands of years. It did not shine with the colors of cruelty and slaughter, but only calmness and matter of fact. It was as if it was watching two children who had gone overboard. The bear monsters and giant bears who were watching the battle a moment ago felt their hearts stop beating at the same time the moment the icicles fell. It was as if the ventricles were beating prematurely, and the entire heart skipped a beat. They looked up in shock and saw a pair of typical human eyes appear in the larger purplish-blue vortex. They did not know that this was an illusory eye of energy created from Duque's eyes. They only knew that this pair of huge eyes suddenly opened, and in the next instant, a terrifying pressure descended from the sky, directly pressing down on the basin. Accompanied by the falling icicles, a powerful hailstorm swept through the entire basin in a clockwise direction. All the bear monsters grunted at the same time, and then they were swept up by this powerful hailstorm, flying in all directions like cannonballs. Roar! Roar! At the bottom of the basin, the two giant war bears were using all their means to kill this powerful demon, who was actually their brother. User and Yusak's souls had been completely confused, and their spirit vision was no longer normal. Under the influence of the dark power, Duque was also an evil existence in their eyes. Unfortunately, Duque had long been prepared for this. The Song of Light and Shadow, in Duque's right hand crazily cut at the dark magic formation in the air. Bathed in holy golden light, Duque could not be twisted into any evil existence. However, Zotha's mental hypnosis and soul corruption were not so simple. In the next instant, in the eyes of the two bear monsters, Duque was restored to a human. Unfortunately, he was a human from 10,000 years ago, still in the state of savages. Just like how city dwellers could not stand country bumpkins. Civilized people could not stand barbarians who ate raw meat and drank blood. What were the humans in the ancient war? They were existences akin to ants. Anyone who was bitten by an ant or even accidentally tripped by a chain reaction would feel ashamed and indignant. When the bear brothers were hit by the icicles in the sky and began to slow down, their already fuzzy consciousness was filled with such anger. There was nothing strange about it. Bear monsters were easily emotional creatures and could easily fall into a state of rage. To the bear monster, the god of the wilderness, the most simple and direct rule of the wilderness was the survival of the fittest. In their eyes, weak existences were either equivalent to food or not worth mentioning. Now that they had been slapped in the face by an existence they looked down upon, it was only natural that their already uncontrollable rage was added to the flames. At the same time, they gave up their original targets, each other, and turned to rush towards Duque. Duque finally realized that Zotha's method was truly ingenious. He did not simply carry out mental control. Instead, he cultivated a brand new human, bear, personality in the soul of a demigod of this level and encouraged it to devour the original bear personality. Because the new bear personality was just a bear personality extended from the main body's will, it was an existence that regained control of the divine body after its main will fell into a state of destruction, so there was no problem of adaptation at all. In a sense, this was also an excellent path to depravity. It could forcibly bend an upright and righteous bear. The Yusiks could not carefully determine whether Duque was a friend or a foe. In any case, they only knew that they were unbridled with anger. All of this was because of that damned insect, Duque, who obstructed them from destroying the Burning Legion's great demon. Die! The two giant bears spoke in the human language, and with a mix of angry roars, they pounced over. Before they arrived, Duque could already feel two terrifying forces coming from the ground beneath his feet. They were so strong that there was no way to resist them. This was pure and absolute power, just like the power that Azeroth used to create the present Golden Age from the beginning of chaos. Facing them head-on would definitely lead to death. Duque was calm. There was no despair or panic on his face. The Bear Brothers were indeed the powerful demigod duo that had single-handedly beaten the entire Demon Legion into submission during the Ancient War. If not for the fact that the demons could turn invisible and successfully assassinate them. Perhaps only the Archerons would be able to suppress them. However, they also had a very obvious weakness: they relied too much on the ground. The two brothers were the most classic experts in combat on foot. Once they left the ground, they were nothing. Just as the two giant bear monsters were about to reach Duque, the ground 30 meters in front of Duque suddenly froze. A huge block of ice with an area of more than 3,000 square meters was flipped over by Duque's will. It was not a heaven and earth shattering, but it was even worse than heaven and earth shattering. The two giant bears were directly flipped over by the huge block of ice. The next second, Yusiks fell to the ground with all four legs facing the sky. At some point, Duque had already flashed over, and the Song of Light and Shadow, in his right hand tapped on Yusik's head. In an instant, they communicated mentally. As expected, Enzo's violent dark will surged over and crashed into the barrier that Duque had constructed in his mind. The violent will was like a never-ending tsunami, crashing into the embankment of Duque's mind. Even with the combined will of Duque and Alonce's fail, Duque still suffered a heavy blow and spat out a mouthful of blood. However, it was all worth it. In the eyes of an outsider, Duque had already used the system elf to invade Yusik's mind and erased the dark illusion. He also communicated with Yusiks in detail through mental communication. When Yusiks flipped over and pounced at Duque, Yusiks was the one who blocked him. Two black bears the size of small hills crashed into each other with the purest form of violence. For front paws slammed into each other's shoulders. In just a single exchange, Yusik's shoulders were already covered with a few ghastly scratches. Now's the time. Yusiks roared. Duque appeared on the back of Yusik's neck as he had wished. This time, the golden holy sword pierced into the back of Yusik's head. However, it was very controlled, and it only pierced less than 3 centimeters into the skull. For a giant bear whose head alone was the size of a carriage, this was nothing. Yusik's chaotic and violent eyes gradually became clear. Chapter 1796. My brother. Am I the one who did this? Heavens! What did I do? Uther looked at the horrifying bloodstains on his brother's shoulders and body, and immediately realized that it was his doing. This was not a flesh wound, but a ruthless slap with the intent to kill, coupled with an ultimate elemental impact. Uther clearly remembered his chaotic madness moments ago. After he woke up, he felt the darkest sense of guilt, pain, and despair. No! My heavens! Your soul will be destroyed. User cried out in alarm. You speak as if your soul can survive this. Uther's huge bare face revealed an extremely human-like wry smile. Then, the two brothers turned their heads at the same time, showing an apologetic expression to Duque, who had flashed away and was standing in a triangle with them. I didn't expect the world to change so quickly. Powerful humans. We're very tempted by your proposal. But, it seems like our souls can't take it anymore. What a pity. Just as Duque stabbed Uther's head with Song of Light and Shadow, Duque had also completed a mental exchange with him. Now, there was a more serious problem: the two demigod souls were in a worse state than expected. This was because, in a very short period of time for a demigod, Uther had been resurrected twice. This forced resurrection consumed a lot of soul force, especially Uther. The last time, his soul had been first contaminated, then purified, and returned to the Emerald Dream before being resurrected and contaminated again. This was like a person who had been injured and cut off rotten flesh to heal, but before new flesh could grow, more of the good flesh had rotted away. The result was naturally a mess. What was worse was that the two brothers' soul foundation, commonly known as the spirit base, was actually connected. This was a little like the twin emperors, because their souls were connected, so were their injuries. Although this damage was not enough to completely destroy the brothers' souls, it was clearly part of Zatha's plot. If their spirit base was greatly damaged, then the two brothers' souls would have to return to the Emerald Dream and recuperate for 1,000 years or even thousands of years without being contaminated. Only then would they have the opportunity to accept the next resurrection. Without a doubt, this would cause the Bear Demon Demigod brothers to not be able to make it to the upcoming battle in the Land of Fire, or even the Return of Armies, at a later time. In that schemer's mind, it would be best if the Bear brothers fell, but even if they didn't, he couldn't let the Alliance or the God of the Wilderness benefit. Duque frowned deeply. Duque was now a demigod. As a demigod who was still connected to the weave, Duque's every action and thought could affect the entire weave. At that moment, there was a gust of wind on the boulder hill. A strong wind with an elemental aura blew through the grass on the hill, causing rustling sounds. Countless withered leaves flew over the heads of the bear monsters. In the far east, the endless sea was sparkling. From the east to the west, the salty ocean wind passed through the hills and blew into the distance. At that moment, Duque saw the pleading look in the Bear brothers' eyes. Actually, Duque could completely ignore the Bear brothers. The Azeroth of this life was definitely much stronger than the original Azeroth in history. The bear monsters had courted death and resurrected USOC twice in a short period of time. Who could be blamed for this? But Duque could totally imagine that no matter how temporary the Burning Legion was, who would protect the bear monsters who had lost the protection of their demigod? This was the sorrow of a weak race. They couldn't even take care of themselves, so who would care about the friendship of the God of the Wilderness when they joined forces to fight against the Burning Legion? Duque heard the leaves of a lonely tree not far from him creaking. He suddenly had a feeling. The current alliance was indeed stronger than it had been at the same point in history. What did they rely on? Wasn't it just pulling back experts who would have died or fallen at different points in time? This was like gathering sand to form a tower. Without those grains of sand, without those 20 years of hard work, how could they have the strength they had today, the strength of the Alliance? Facing the gale of the apocalypse, a tree was indeed lonely. What about the forest? What about the dense and vast primeval forest? Duque could imagine that if he gave up at a certain point, perhaps this organization known as the Alliance, known as the Azeroth Grand Alliance, would be destroyed by an ant's nest. It wouldn't be long before he heard the roar of the City of Destiny in his heart collapsing. Duque let out a long breath. To you brothers, I have a suggestion. On the other side, the bear monsters and giant bears who had just been sent flying had already slowly climbed up from the ground. They didn't scatter in all directions. Because the God they believed in and trusted was still fighting. But the scene had changed. The God of the bear monsters, who was invincible in their eyes, was actually hugging their archenemy, the devil. Yes, in their eyes, this was the most unbelievable thing. At this moment, the divine will that ruled over them came. Every bear or bear monster stopped on this former battlefield. They stood upright like humans, each bear head raised high and looked at the sky. The demigod brothers of the bear monsters were impressively in the sky. Yusak said immediately, "We've been deceived by the ancient evil god En-Zoth." Yusak followed up, "There's no burning legion at this moment." As they spoke, their vision suddenly underwent the most intense change. A moment ago, they had forgotten everything and couldn't hear or see anything else at all. Their entire souls had fallen into a false silence. At this moment, a brilliant, purple-blue arcane storm erupted in their vision. The storm set off a sky full of arcane missiles that moved in a clockwise direction. When the arcane missiles hit the sky collapsed. When they hit the ground changed color. When they hit the devil turned into a bear monster. It was a complete rewrite of the five senses. Originally, in their minds, they were in a terrible ancient battlefield, cheering for their demigods fighting against a demon lord. Unexpectedly, the entire world was taken over by a peaceful and familiar world in the next second. Their consciousness returned to the grisly hills. The voices of the Yusak brothers resounded in their souls. "Frankly speaking, your souls have been corrupted, and corrupted souls are difficult to redeem. I know that our next request is a bit excessive, but it is, to offer your souls to make up for our damaged souls." Chapter 1797. The result of this is that you will be completely annihilated in this world, unable to leave any trace of yourselves. As for us brothers, we will truly regain the freedom of our souls. We will probably seek refuge with Duke Marcus, the demigod of the weave, and with the blessing of his elemental energy, we will participate in the upcoming war against evil. Just like what we did in the ancient war 10,000 years ago. At this point, the USOC brothers choked. This was the method that Duque had proposed. Sacrificing the souls of the corrupted bears, extracting the pure soul energy from within to repair the souls of their brothers. This was a classic case of harming others for one's own benefit. But Duque had no better idea. Soul energy was a combination of spiritual energy and life energy. The corrupted part had to be cut out, and the remaining gap to be repaired could only be filled with souls. Duque was not a titan, and perhaps even a titan could not create a soul out of nothing. In a sense, the dark energy used by the Burning Legion was just a form of soul energy extracted through violent means. Duque could not sacrifice the souls and lives of other races to repair the souls of the demigod bear brothers. The only ones who could make the decision were the bears themselves. Awo! Awo! One of the bears began to howl at the sky. Followed by 100, 1,000, 10,000, tens of thousands. As a human, Duque found it difficult to understand the thoughts of the bears and the bears. He could only be sure that they had made their decision. USOC and User spoke in unison, "We have made our decision. Please begin." It had been a long time since Duque used this method of harvesting souls. Even now, he did not need to enter shadow form. With a point of his finger, the vortex made of weave energy in the sky began to spin. It became a true vortex that sucked in all rivers into the sea. But what it absorbed was souls. One by one, the ethereal and illusory bear spirits were easily stripped from their corpses that were beginning to rot. Almost at the instant the spirits left their bodies, their corpses on the ground rapidly shriveled up. What the vortex brought to them was true destruction. The terrifying slicing of the spirits caused them to involuntarily let out the most mournful wails of their souls. Then, all the low cries of the souls disappeared. After losing the imprint of being an individual, when the darkness was swept away by the high-speed rotation, what was left in the sky was the purest form of soul energy. This soul energy was taken over by the whirlpool controlled by Duque. The energy was continuously mixed up, compressed, and compressed again before passing through a huge golden magical formation net controlled by Alonsis Fail. In the end, the soul energy that seemed to connect the heavens and the earth split into two and entered Ushuk and User's spirit bodies. Woo! Cough! Even though Duque had already smashed the spirit into pieces, the two brothers could still clearly feel all the emotions contained in the soul fragments of their compatriots. It was a land that had been completely destroyed by depravity and destruction. Not a single blade of grass grew, and the forests were scorched. It was a world without plants, a world where even herbivores could not survive. Without herbivores, there were naturally no large carnivores like bears or bear monsters. It was the fear of hunger, the desire to survive. The most primitive instincts of animals were gathered in the soul fragments and merged with the souls of the two demigods. The fusion continued. At some point in time, the two demigods were already crying. Two incomparably huge bear-shaped existences were shedding silent tears. This was a very strange scene. But Duque felt that he could understand that feeling. If it were him, he would have to sacrifice tens of thousands of humans to ensure his own survival in order to protect more humans. It would definitely not be a good feeling. Soon, all the soul energy had been injected into the two demigods' spirit bodies. Next was the most thorough soul fusion. The two demigods closed their eyes at the same time as if they were asleep. Duque thought that this should not be a problem. Finally, there was a long wait. 1 hour, 2 hours, a full 12 hours. Suddenly, the two demigods' eyes widened in anger. They immediately began to absorb the elemental energy of the magical net. 10 seconds passed. Two earth-shattering crashing sounds resounded throughout the entire boulder hill. The terrifying earthquake caused Duque to fall into a trance. It was as if the deep rock continent had already connected with Azeroth in advance. The ground instantly split open, and the zigzagged cracks extended in all directions. Then there was a sound. A wild, ancient sound that seemed to pierce the eardrums of all living beings in the surroundings. The primitive and barbaric bear race roared, announcing that they would tear apart all evil. It was just a roar, but the waves of air that swept past gave people the feeling of a raging storm. The two bears were as big as small fortresses, and their eyes were the size of water tanks. They stared fiercely at Duque. Duke Marcus. Is your promise still valid? Facing the bear brothers' questioning, Duke's mouth curled up. Of course it's effective. As long as the Alliance exists, the bear race will not go extinct. The bear monsters you protect will become the fourth vassal race of the Alliance after the Murlocs, Nagas, and the Kiraji bug people. And I swear in the name of the demigod of Azeroth that once Sargeras is destroyed in the Return of the Legion, I will release your souls and restore your freedom. A demigod's oath under the witness of the planet's will was naturally trustworthy. Feeling the faint echo from the planet's will, the grimacing bear brothers' expressions softened. Then, in this period of time, please take care of us, Master. Hearing this, Duque finally breathed a sigh of relief. The two demigods who could bear the most damage among the god of the wilderness had finally been accepted as underlings. In theory, the one who could bear the most damage wasn't the bear brothers, but the tortoise god, Tatora. The problem was that, he could bear it, but he couldn't hold the enemy back. Unless the enemy was stupid, who would be so ruthless and risk their lives to knock on Totora's unparalleled titanium alloy tortoise shell? In any case, the turtle god's attack power was simply too weak. To put it bluntly, it couldn't kill many demons even if it was left alone. If it were Duque in command, he would only call a few elite demons to play with the tortoise god. Of course, if there was some gorilla god who repeatedly threw Tatora like a stone at the demons, that would be a different matter. While Duque was dealing with the bear brothers, good news came from Mount Hyjal. The wolf god Goldring and the crow god Avina had been resurrected. However, there was a new problem. Goldring seemed to be looking for trouble with Varian. Chapter 1798. When they arrived at the peak of Mount Hyjal, the descent of the Land of Fire had yet to be completed. Even though the atmosphere was tense, it still gave off a feeling that there was still plenty of time. Hence, there was a rather hilarious scene in the empty space beside the Nordrassel Inn at the highest point of Mount Hyjal. "Tyrant, what's wrong? Why did you call me over in such a hurry?" Duque hurriedly opened the teleportation portal with his bear brothers. Tyrant, who was dressed in a moon-white priest robe, seemed to be unable to maintain her dignified and noble temperament. She seemed to be possessed, or rather, her tone had dropped. She covered her mouth and secretly pointed to the front. "See for yourself." In the empty space, a huge white wolf pressed its front leg against William's armor, and half of its body stood upright. William, on the other hand, straightened his back and stared at Goldring's huge wolf eyes with determination. It felt as though he could press the tiny Varian to the ground with his huge wolf foot, putting on a show of planting a king in spring and reaping many more kings in autumn. If there was any danger, Brawl and Valilla would have been furious. Actually, it wasn't. The huge white wolf was naturally Goldrassel. A canine that didn't show its sharp claws wasn't considered hostile, at least. Their conversation made Duque dumbfounded, and he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Goldrassel opened his big mouth towards William, and his grayish-black nose was right in front of William's breastplate. "Son. Call me Daddy." "No." William was speechless. "Do you believe that I'll eat you?" "No." A cross-shaped vein appeared on William's forehead. "If you don't scream, are you trying to see if my teeth are sharp?" "Get lost, all right, 2 veins." "Humph. If I didn't share some of my soul with you back then, you would have died under the hammer of misfortune." Goldrassel bared his teeth. "I am William Rin, the son of the great Stormwind King Lang Rin." "Goldrassel. I respect your contributions, but this doesn't mean that I'll accept being the son of a wolf." William's neck was already red, and it seemed like he was reaching his limit. What's so bad about becoming the son of a demigod? Goldring was a little angry. "If my father, Lang, was a demigod, would be very happy. But I am human. It's not a wolf," William said firmly. Acknowledging one's ancestors was, of course, acknowledging the ancestors of the human race. Why did he choose to be a beast instead of a decent human being? William had already considered the bigger picture by not fighting to the death on the spot. However, he did not know what the wolf was thinking. William's biggest mistake was to think of the wolf's thoughts as a human. On the other side, Tyrant poked the snickering Duque in the waist, finally waking him up. Tyrant wasn't the only one. Even the other 2 members of William's team were staring at Duque with resentment in their eyes. If Duke hadn't singled out William to capture him that day, there wouldn't have been so many problems. Duque glared at the 2 of them. That's right. Goldrassel's character was just that strange. As long as this fellow was completely resurrected, he would definitely look for William. William the Ghost had inherited a part of Goldrassel's soul. In the eyes of the wolf god, this was even worse than his son. However, the matter still had to be resolved. Cough cough. Duque pretended to cough. In fact, Goldrassel had noticed Duque a long time ago. The purity of the elemental energy on Duque's body was like a human torch in the dark in Goldrassel's eyes. It was difficult not to see it. "Duque, come quickly." "Human. This is none of your business. This is a problem between me and my son." "Who's your son?" "You," Duque suddenly attacked. He raised his hands horizontally with his palms facing downwards. The next moment, the wolf god felt his body become extremely heavy. It was a heavy feeling that made it difficult for him to even lift a finger. The deceleration spell was not rare. The deceleration spell that could suppress a demigod was rather impressive. Almost at the same time, Goldrassel's lips that covered his teeth turned upwards, revealing a mouthful of crisscrossed sharp teeth. His body slightly arched, he was ready to attack. Regardless of the reason, he was ready to attack this meddlesome demigod. Duque smiled faintly. William, what god of the wilderness? To put it bluntly, it's just a beast that has ascended from the soul and body to the divine realm. Even if it speaks the human language, it's still a beast. Beast, just use the simplest method to make him understand your will. Let's fight. With your current strength. I'll make Goldrassel's strength fall to your level. William immediately realized that Duke's words made sense. He didn't waste any time and acted on his thoughts. He unsheathed his famous twin swords on the spot, and the dazzling radiance made Goldring squint his eyes. Want to fight? Very well. I'll lower my strength. Human demigod, don't meddle. After saying that, Goldrassel turned his huge wolf head. And, William, if I defeat you, you'll have to call me Daddy. No. I'll tell you with my sword that you can forget about it forever. William was almost gnashing his teeth. William turned his left arm at lightning speed, and the Shadow Ripper slashed towards Goldrassel's wolf claws. Wolves were never creatures that relied on strength. They were creatures that relied on agility. Goldrassel didn't care at first, and was prepared to use his demigod body to take on William's sword. However, in the next second, he realized that something was wrong. That abominable human demigod had actually expelled the elements in the surrounding space, causing his body's toughness to drop drastically. You. For a moment, Goldrassel wanted to attack Duque first. I'm Duke Marcus, the current Supreme Commander of the Alliance. I've said it before, I'll let you have a fair battle with William. Accompanied by Duque's mocking words, he displayed the strength of a top-tier demigod. Duque's insane deceleration spell actually reduced Goldrassel's speed to the level of a legendary hero. Duque wasn't a warlock, so he didn't have any weakening curse. Even if Goldrassel's speed was reduced, the wolf god's strength wouldn't change much. Moreover, the demigod body was still the demigod body. But this was enough for William. Even though it was a dual-wielding berserker, he still had the godly special skill, armor penetration. William didn't attack immediately. Instead, he swung his swords and gave Goldrassel 5 stacks of armor penetration. A man and a wolf fought fiercely in the open space next to the hotel. This battle could be said to be chaotic and gloomy. Tyrant frowned. Are we just going to let them fight like this? Duque shrugged. What can I do? When William lost his memory and became a slave gladiator, he accidentally picked up the wolf god's soul fragment and fused it perfectly. Who can we blame for this? Chapter 1799. The relationship between William and Goldring was King messed up. With the bloodline of the Rin family, it was already a blessing for him to be able to become a legendary hero. Goldring's soul fragment definitely played a big part in William's current battle prowess. But William couldn't possibly return to his roots and become a werewolf just because of that. That was why he was stuck in a dilemma. It was impossible for William to return the soul fragment. Duque had long discovered that Goldring's werewolf soul had merged perfectly with the violent version of William. At the same time, the cowardly version of William's soul represented the inheritance of the Rin family. Sometimes, Duque even had the evil thought of asking Onyxia to come over and split William into 2 again. One would be a demigod wolf prince and lead the werewolves. The other would be the king of Stormwind and continue to lead Stormwind. Of course, this was just a thought. If he really did that, there would be nothing left for the old wolf king Jean. And the Stormwind kingdom would also become a weak chicken, unable to recover from this setback. Duque shamelessly brought out beach chairs, popcorn, and other snacks. Together with Tyrande and the rest, they watched the wolf and man vent their dissatisfaction and energy. Overall, William was at a disadvantage. Even though William trained himself to be very strong, the limits of a mortal were clear. As long as he didn't cross the boundary of the divine realm, his physical endurance was limited. Wolves were originally a race with good endurance. In order to hunt, they could chase their prey day and night without rest. Moreover, Duque's deceleration spell didn't weaken Goldring's physique. They fought and roared along the way. Goldring seemed to be stubborn. He preached along the way, bragging about his glorious history in ancient times. In general, it was that his papa was very powerful, that he was invincible in the wilderness of ancient Kalimdor, that he had beaten up demons, and that he was the vanguard of the god of the wilderness. At first, Valilla and Brawl were quite nervous. Later, when they realized that William was at a disadvantage due to his lack of stamina, the shameless blood elf thief suggested that Duque continue to whittle away at Goldring's strength. Duque rolled his eyes. "Why don't you just ask me to kill the wolf god?" The wolf deity could accept fairness, but he absolutely could not accept being oppressed. Any more and he would fall out with them. In the end, it was Goldring who felt bored. "I'm done. I'm not fighting anymore. I'll go back and think about how to teach your stone-headed son a lesson." "I'm not your son." William rebuked the wolf god. "If I say you are, then you are." "I'm not." The story between the wolf god and Varian was more like a small interlude. As the Land of Fire began to fuse completely with Azeroth, no matter how eager he was to find his son, Goldring had no choice but to put aside his personal affairs and enter a state of battle. Whoa! Hua! Whoa! Looking from the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal to the southern foothills, every elf could see the sky filled with fire meteors falling in all directions. However, these terrifying fireballs grew larger and larger. When they flew closer to the northern foothills, they suddenly disappeared without a trace, as if it was an illusion. It's not an illusion. When the space of the Land of Fire fuses with Azeroth, these fireballs will really fly over, Duque said with certainty. Over the past few days, even when the Night Elf Sentinels were on break duty, they looked nervously at the world of fire in the south that was getting bigger and bigger. The only thing that could give them comfort was the flying city of Dalajan, which was hovering above the western side of Mount Hyjal. The Alliance was as reliable as ever. They had sent their city of wizards, and Duque was personally in charge. Only the elements could resist the elements. This was already the strongest combat force that the Alliance could send out. On this day, the direction of the wind changed, and a strong wind suddenly blew in the south. Some sentinels were already screaming. "Fire! The fire is coming! The flames in the southern foothills are spreading towards us." Countless elves were alarmed. They rushed out and saw a strange scene that they would never forget in their lives. That was the true meaning of a prairie fire. Countless balls of fire seemed to spread endlessly towards the north, like the light of the rising sun chasing away the darkness. Even though Duque had ordered the Alliance to use bulldozers and logging equipment to chop down a large number of trees, forcibly opening up a fire belt that was more than a kilometer wide between the southern and northern foothills, the fire was still spreading unreasonably. The fire continued to spread unreasonably. With a crackling sound, it spread across the mountainous area that was already devoid of green, devouring everything in its path. The short tree stumps became torches, and the scorched land that had already been stripped of grass was still burning away all the nutrients inside. Then, the sea of fire passed through the fire belt and burned into the dense sea of trees at the northern foothills of Mount Hyjal. The towering trees fell one after another, and countless leaves were ignited. They fell from the branches, and before they could fall to the ground, they were already burned into ashes in midair. Countless sparks were swept up into the sky by the surging flames, and soon, a larger area of the forest was set ablaze, and the cycle started again. "No! Our forest. Heavens, how is this any different from the Burning Legion? The night elves wept. Their tears flew into the distance along with their hair that danced wildly in the wind. Tyrant and Malfurion's faces were ashen. In the end, they could not revive the demigod Cenarius before the land of fire descended. We can only rely on Duque. Malfurion said in a low voice. Yes. Tyrant looked up at the majestic magic city in the sky, and her gaze turned from unease to determination. He has never disappointed me. In the Dalagen, Duque sat in the largest mage tower in the city. It was a mage tower that the Dalagen had specially built for him, the demigod of the weave. Duque might not even be able to stay in the Dalagen for a day in a year. Since Duque had made the Dalagen and Naxxramas one of the three most important nodes of the weave in Azeroth, he still had to build this mage tower properly. Sitting on the highest floor of his mage tower, Duque sat on a chair that was connected to the entire Dalagen city through a magic formation. In a sense, the Dalagen city was already Duque's private property, because the entire magic network of the city had been completely integrated into the weave. Duque gently raised his right hand, and his finger drew a line in the air. I said, "This is the border." Duque's seemingly simple whisper was clearly heard by every Dalagen mage. Even Kael, who was waiting by Duque's side, could not help but feel a chill in his heart. The entire Dalagen city lit up. The muzzle of the main cannon that had not been used for a long time suddenly lit up. It was not the bombardment of the main magic cannon, but it was better than the full power of the main cannon. The purple light that shot out from the muzzle easily tore the earth apart. From west to east, the entire Mount Hyjal was divided into two parts, north and south. It was a terrifying move that ended the surging of the elements, like a wall separating the earth from the earth. All the flames were isolated for no reason. They tumbled and surged, surging and surging. They even seemed to endlessly sweep high into the sky, wanting to break through the clouds and reach the horizon. In the end, not a single flame could surpass the boundary that Duque had drawn. Chapter 1800. This wasn't really splitting the mountain. The purple beam only penetrated about 1 meter into the ground at most. If Duque really split Mount Hyjal in half, even if it was to resist the land of fire, the elves would probably still be extremely resentful towards Duque. In fact, what Duque was really doing was to buffer the exchange of elements between Mount Hyjal and the land of fire. In a sense, the location where the beam split the ground became a new border between the two conflicting dimensions. If Duque hadn't gone through the battle at the Molten Core and obtained Ragnaros's share of control over the fire elements, the shock wave of the fire elements from the land of fire when the planes merged would all affect Duque, the leader. Bearing the escape of a large elemental plane wasn't something a human or demigod could do. Even the entire Dalagen couldn't succeed. Bearing the impact of such a huge amount of elemental energy in an instant, even if the entire Dalagen put up a magic shield with all its strength, the entire city would be torn apart in an instant. Having control over a portion of the fire elemental energy was an entirely different matter. Other than the fire elements that surged over involuntarily at first, the fire elements that were still rational immediately chose to listen to their master Duque's orders and began to escape to other places. Bastard! Attack! Attack! The angry roar of the fire demon King Ragnaros could be vaguely heard in the entire land of fire. With his roar, the fire elements that had just rushed into the sky and more fire elements inside the land of fire stirred again, ready to sweep over. Shut up! Loser! I said no one can come over. Duque's loud voice resounded in the world. The fire elements were instantly conflicted. Between the two bosses, one had the right to order them, so who should they listen to? I want this world to become purgatory. I want to burn everything in the world. Nothing can stop the descent of the flames. My slaves. Attack! Ragnaros urged the fire elementals. Attack my ass. Go back. Ragnaros is my loser. He has no right to come and fight with me for territory. Duque also roared. Flame elementals conflict degree plus 10,086. Duke Marcus, all you've done is defeat my clone. I will burn you to death. I will. The Balrog's anger seemed to have risen to another level. TSK. You're still so stubborn even after losing. In any case, I won. Duque retorted. I will use my flames to devour your soul. I'll make you wail under my throne for millions of years. You are my defeated opponent. You are my defeated opponent. No matter what Lager said, Duque would choke Lager to death with one sentence, you're my defeated opponent. In the end, even Duque himself felt that the two of them were like those trolls with an IQ of 50 on the internet before he transmigrated. Not only were they uncultured, but their insults were also meaningless. The mortals below had their horizons broadened. The Alliance soldiers, mainly made up of elves, were probably also wondering why the two demigods only knew how to talk and not fight a real battle. Actually, it was a little unfair. Although Duque and Ragnaros controlled a portion of the fire elemental plane and could use large amounts of fire elements at will, it seemed quite impressive. Few people would have thought that power and duty were closely linked. Plane fusion was not that simple. When planes collided, the spatial backlash that resulted had to be settled by the plane master. Ragnaros could not move at all now. He could only bitterly repair his own domain in the core of the Land of Fire. Although it was plane fusion, if he did not separate the Land of Fire from the Land of Azeroth, he would not be able to extract fire elements from the Land of Fire in the future. Moreover, to seize control of the fire elements of the entire Land of Azeroth, which was many times larger than the Land of Fire, would require incalculable time and energy. Lager could not move, and it was difficult for outsiders to enter because the space in the Land of Fire was not too stable. One mistake and they would fall into some spatial rift and be unable to come out. That would be laughable. This meant that it would be difficult for a king to fight against a king in the early stages. After finally ending the argument, Duque let out a long sigh of relief. Phew. It's finally done. Duque turned to Kale, that's. I'll leave this place to you. Yes, don't worry. Go and rest, Commander. Kale, that's bowed deeply. How many times have I told you, Kale, that's, no need to be so polite. Duque's cheek muscles twitched. If you didn't protect me back then, I would have been a stray dog, Kale, that's said very seriously. Alright, up to you. Duque shrugged, opened a portal, and returned to the top of Mount Hyjal. Almost as soon as he came out, a white figure rushed up and kissed him without saying anything. Not bad. It was rare for Tyrande to kiss someone so openly. Duque blinked and saw Malfurion, who had avoided his sight not far behind. For some reason, he felt that the great druid's hood made of lush green grass was very green. Duque, you're amazing. Only you can help us defend the sacred mountain. Tyrande said excitedly. Duque could not understand the Night Elves' fanatical feelings for Mount Hyjal. Speaking of which, didn't he force the Arc-Herons to explode once? The explosion of Mount Hyjal was just like opening a bag. It was a little painful the first time, but he got used to it the second time. In any case, the group of elves seemed to have ignored their high priest's treasonous act of kissing a human, and instead showered Duque with praises. Thank you, great demigod of the weave. You are the benefactor of all life on Mount Hyjal. In the end, even Malfurion, who seemed to have an unruly green grassland above his head, came up and bowed deeply to Duque. He said sincerely, "Thank you, Lord Marcus. Without you, the fire elements would have destroyed at least 100 miles to the north." "All right. Since even Malfurion is thanking me, Duque did not hesitate to hug Tyron's waist in front of Malfurion. Malfurion's gaze flickered again. However, he seemed to sigh in his heart, and then looked straight at Duque and Tyron. Don't test me. Actually, I've accepted this fact a long time ago. Although I feel that you're too fickle. But, Tyron's happiness is the most important. I bless you. The moon goddess also blesses you. Next, I will dedicate my soul and life to nature as a big druid. With that, Malfurion nodded and left without looking back. Perhaps he was crying, or perhaps he was crying from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 1801. Duque felt a little guilty towards an honest man like Malfurion. **T. Tyron raised her right hand, as if she wanted to ask him to stay or say something, but in the end, she lowered her arm dejectedly. In this life, she and the Stormrage brothers were childhood friends, but fate had made her miss the two brothers. She snuggled into Duque's arms. Hey! Duque. After discussing with me, Goddess Elune announced that Chandris will be the next saintess of the Elune Sisterhood. She also gave her blessings to you and me in the entire Elune Sisterhood. When you become a true god, I will serve you. I see. That's great. Duque finally understood why the elves would react this way when Tyron announced their relationship. Speaking of which, did Elune notice something? The cataclysm was a huge blow to the old world, and the ecology of the entire planet was severely affected. But staying the same meant that everything had to follow the prescribed order. Earth-shattering changes often brought destruction, but they also meant the arrival of a huge opportunity. As one of the few true gods in this world, Elune definitely knew something. Did the planet's consciousness finally open a VIP channel for the Guardians to rapidly increase their power? Or was it some other opportunity? Otherwise, there was no way to explain why Elune would reveal the agreement they had made a long time ago. After all, a high priestess who was in love would definitely weaken the holy light on her body, and it would not be beneficial for Tyron to continue ruling the Night Elves. Announcing Chandris as the saintess at this time was a classic example of letting Chandris take over. Duque shook his head to get these questions out of his mind. Elune was mysterious. She did not look for him directly, which meant that she was not willing to tell him. There was no point in looking for her. Duque decided to focus on this battle. To be honest, the early stage was really small. Because the space was unstable, the fire elementals that could rush out were the lowest level ones. How low were they? Only an earth mage's frost arrow could deal with it with Bayou. Elemental creatures were best dealt with elements. The fire elementals didn't have a physical body, so the elven sentinels and archers could only watch. Of course, Duque would not let them fight back. Almost every elf was equipped with Dalaran's enchanted arrows and weapons, such as ice weapon, and the like. These weapons that used the ice element to deal damage to fire elemental creatures could indeed give mortals a chance to kill elemental creatures, but enchantments were simply too expensive. Icy weapon, which had a slight deceleration effect, would cost about 50 gold coins. Moreover, this was the real world, so the effects of the enchantment would not be the same. If he used it too harshly, the frost element would be consumed faster than the miniature magic array would absorb it. The enchantment might break. Therefore, the first round of resistance against the invasion of the fire elements became Pharaoh's task. No, it should be called a paradise for low-level mages. With Duque's 10 years of emphasis on wizard education and the fact that the weave had greatly reduced the difficulty for apprentices to become official wizards, the Alliance's pool of talented wizards was considerable. Unfortunately, there were not many opportunities for the mages to practice. How could there be so many live targets in the Dalaran? Most of the monsters in the wild were scattered. Sometimes, they could not find a suitable target even if they ran all over the place. Either they were not strong or weak, or they were simply too strong and could not beat them. How could it be like now, where all the weakest fire elementals came out? In the game, this was a batch of level 10 to level 20 fire elementals. The Dalajan Pharaoh was energized. Where are the Earth Mages? Gather all the Earth Mages to practice. Sky Mages are on standby. Morning Star Mages are ready to support. Kale, that's ordered. Hence, no less than 20,000 Earth Mages and even high-ranked apprentices rushed to the various defensive lines of Mount Hyjal to help the Night Elves resist the invasion of the Fire Elementals. Don't worry about magic. As long as you can sense the weave and sign the treaty, there will definitely be enough Ice Elementals. Look at your spiritual force. If you feel dizzy, stop immediately. The mentors instructed their students. From the west to the east, the sound of ice arrows being shot could be heard everywhere on the battlefront that was almost 100 kilometers long. Prediction. Prediction of where to move. Fire elemental creatures are not targets that just stand there and wait for you to hit them. You have to predict their speed and direction, and prepare for the attack. Damn it! If this was the era without the weave, you would not have had the chance to become official mages. You are the worst batch of students I have ever taught. The ancient and conservative Night Elves had never seen such an awesome large-scale actual combat exercise before. Towards the end, even the Cenarian Circle could not sit still. Malfurion wrote a large number of words. Given that the new generation of druids are obsessed with spiritual training, their actual combat ability is too poor. All the low-ranked druids were pulled into actual combat exercises. As a result, there were scenes of low-level druids playing with star fire and moon fire in every camp. The spatial fusion continued. When the fire elementals rushing out of the land of fire started to appear in the mid-ranked, Duque added sky mages. Low-ranked against low-ranked, mid-ranked against mid-ranked. Practice. Continue practicing. Even if lives are lost, practice. If they did not practice today, they would have to use up a large number of lives in the future. It was very likely that only 1 out of 100 could become a high-ranked mage. While the Alliance was playing Pharaoh, the tribe was also launching an attack on the Twilight Fortress in the Great Rift Valley. Frankly speaking, the situation was not optimistic. The tribe was also seriously biased, almost all of them were butcher teams. Not to mention Pharaoh, they did not even have many long-range mages. In the face of the Twilight Dragon army that constantly dived and bombed, or dived and spat dragon breath, the tribe could not come up with any good ideas. In addition to relying on the troll spears and the troll hunters shooting, the more reliable thing was the goblin cannons. A certain Rustwater conglomerate's Prince of Trade really put in a lot of effort this time, pulling out hundreds of goblin cannons. They were not high-level goods, but black gunpowder cannons that had been abandoned by the Alliance. And they were King Britches. Any officer in the Alliance would probably burst out laughing if he saw this. Britches and Grapeshot were the most effective anti-air firepower. In fact, it was only effective against the underage Twilight Dragons. Most of the real adult Twilight Dragons were transferred away by Neltharion, which avoided the embarrassment of the tribe. Every time the Grapeshot shot down a young Twilight Dragon, the tribe would burst into enthusiastic cheers. Of course, there would be a group of muscular men who would run to the ground to be dragon slayers. Except for the brainless roar, several of the tribe's big shots were sighing behind their backs. "Is Duque willing to help?" Cain asked. Woken was dispirited. He replied with 4 words, "None of my business." Chapter 1802. The relationship between the Horde and the Alliance was completely ruined. Apart from Wajin, who could still talk to the Alliance, the two sides had almost closed all channels of negotiation. Who was to blame? From the day Garush came to power without inviting the leader of the alliance, the relationship between the two sides had plummeted. First of all, Garush did not admit that the Horde and the alliance owed money in commercial trade. He believed that the alliance had greatly artificially lowered the price of ore in the trade, which was a shameless exploitation of the Horde. The Horde denied this kind of bad debt obtained through deception. Secondly, there were territorial disputes. The new oasis in the Desolace was indeed done by Fandral Staghelm, but it was done in the name of the Cenarian Circle. Without a word, Garush ignored the opposition of the Tauran druid Hamur Runtotem, and even threatened Hamur to label him as a traitor, and ordered the tribes in the Desolace to attack. Hamur had informed the Night Elf druids to evacuate ahead of time, thus avoiding a direct war with the Night Elves. But in Grey Valley, Garush claimed that the Horde had the right to cut wood. Taking advantage of the elves' retreat to prepare for the arrival of the Land of Fire, he sent people into Grey Valley to cut wood, preparing to rebuild Orgrimmar City. If this was not a slap in the face, what was? In order to appease the elves, the alliance had to cut wood from the elven forest and send it over. Now the Horde was taking advantage of this? Who gave you the courage to do this? Wajin, Kane, and even a group of big bosses, including Dranos, advised Braindead Roar not to act rashly, but Braindead Roar did not listen. You have a problem? Sure. Follow me, Makara. Braindead Roar, with his veins bulging in his neck red, looked like he would never talk to anyone nicely. But this was very popular with the soldiers and the people. Most of the orcs agreed with his ascension to the position of Great Chief, thinking that his straightforward warrior instincts and unwillingness to negotiate were the true character of the orcs. Garush was grateful for the orcs' recognition and wanted these green-skinned orcs to accept him, but he did not have the time and patience to show his leadership style. He ordered the attack on the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands, which was a nightmare in the eyes of those with a bit of brain. Because, wherever the disaster was the most serious, people would be sent to the front line first. Charge! Lock_tar. Once upon a time, this oasis that suddenly appeared in the Barren Lands due to the cataclysm was like the final salvation in despair. As the Twilight Fortress rose from the ground, everything changed. It was originally a mountain that rose abruptly from the ground due to the fission of the earth. After the Twilight Believers occupied this place, they used earth magic from the deep rock continent to drill through the mountain and enslave the new believers who came from all directions to further strengthen the fortress. In this dim highland, the shadows were even darker. The sun and the rest of the Azeroth seemed out of reach. The elemental creatures wandering around the Twilight Fortress were even more boastful. The fireworks will burn even brighter, the torrential rain will strike the earth, the violent tremors of the earth will tear the entire ground apart. Their existence deeply inspired, or perhaps bewitched, the shallow believers who had not yet fully believed in the destruction of the world. When the Horde army attacked Twilight Fortress, the orcs, Tauran, and trolls of the Horde often encountered their own people who had fallen into madness. After raising the butcher's knife to their former compatriots and being stained with blood, the Horde warriors had to face the elemental creatures with the most primitive swords without any support, who were almost immune to physical attacks. This was simply playing with the lives of the soldiers. How could a stone axe tied to a piece of wood deal with a 5-meter-tall earth elemental giant that had a ton of impact with a casual punch? Or could it kill a fire elemental creature whose entire body was made up of fire elements? The Horde warriors were heroic, but their deaths were worthless. However, Gurus kept throwing more troops into the siege. Whichever territory was the most chaotic, the whole family of that territory would be pulled into the battlefield. My father is a great warrior. So is my mother. The brave orc warriors don't discriminate between men and women, Brainless Roar roared. Female orcs were also very good at fighting. This was an orc tradition. Just like Sal's parents, Durotan and Draka, they were also famous for their fighting skills. In this way, brainless roar threw all the refugees into a war that was bound to be lost. This scene made Wuxia and the other leaders tremble. Because of the cataclysm, the necessities of life are increasingly scarce. The Alliance has stopped importing food? It doesn't matter. In the name of righteousness, we can reduce the population through war. One must know that Sal's goal has always been to make the horde bigger and stronger, constantly providing living resources for the people to live and reproduce. Gurus did the opposite. If there were not enough resources, then expand, or consume the population through war. What made the leaders even more disappointed was that the traditional orcs actually approved of this approach, orcs that will die on the battlefield because they are not fierce enough. Orcs that are not fierce enough are trash. You deserve to die. These crude and barbaric ideas run through the ideas of the traditional orcs, who accounted for the majority of the horde's population. Oh my god! Gurus is actually consuming the horde's population and war potential by doing this. Wuxia was about to collapse. The most unbearable thing for the leaders was that Gurus was frantically pressuring them to send more troops. Our orcs have already lost 100,000 people. You trolls and Tauren have the nerve to send so few troops? Compared with the orcs who boasted of strength in numbers, the Tauren and trolls' population base was too small. The Tauren because the grasslands of Mulgore could only support so many people. The trolls because the Darkspear trolls had a small population. After joining the horde, whether it was Kain or Wuxia, they were not stingy with their warriors. There was no ambiguity in the sacrifices that should be made. That wasn't a sacrificial method either. It was completely using one's own soldiers to offset the enemy's resources, or even munitions. In the eyes of Gurus, it was as if the orcs had lost 100,000 people, and the trolls and Tauren should also have lost 10,000 people. This kind of unreasonable tactic simply drove Kain and Wuxia crazy. Even the goblin trade prince Garavix, who did not take human life as a life, was indignant at Gurus's wasteful practice of human life. Because along with human life, there was also his money. The twilight dragon soaring in the sky was simply the biggest nightmare of the horde. Wuxia finally couldn't help but say, Gurus, we can't go on like this. If we don't deal with those big lizards in the sky, it will be meaningless for you to send in all the warriors of the horde. Chapter 1803. No. The death of the warriors is meaningful. Gurus showed an extremely tough side. With a wave of his hand, a female Tauren appeared. Magatha. It's you? Kain's face showed a little displeasure. Magatha Grim Totem. On the surface, this female Tauren shaman was committed to researching ways to turn the Forsaken back into living people. At the same time, she also served as an important advisor to Kain Bloodhoof, but in fact, she was a typical hawk in the tribe. What was even less known was that she had always wanted to see Kain die. Before Kain unified the entire Tauren tribe and led them to Thunder Cliff to settle down, Magatha had already achieved power in her tribe. As a treacherous and powerful shaman and an extremely biased leader, Magatha had never fully accepted Kain as the chief of all the Tauren, nor did she believe that the Bloodhoof tribe could truly fight for the well-being of all the Tauren and unite them together. Although no one could deny her strength, her wisdom, and her erudition, no one was willing to obey her will except those of her own tribe. Kain brought her to Thunder Cliff in order to monitor her every move and control the spread of the Grim Totem clan's influence. Now Kain was dissatisfied that she had actually mixed up with Gurus behind his back. Magatha saluted Kain and then said to everyone, the enemy has been paralyzed. They think that the tribe is just a group of weak bugs that they can slaughter. Wing of Death has just transferred 90% of the Twilight Dragons. They must have gone to deal with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the Alliance. Wuxia, Kain, and Dranusha's hearts fell to the bottom at the same time. Up to this moment, the tribe had sacrificed 200,000 people. These 200,000 fresh lives were just for the sake of causing trouble, and then creating an opportunity for the tribe to attack the Twilight Fortress? How cold and cruel was this? If Gurus was only cold and cruel, then when he mixed up with the insidious and cunning Magatha, the effect was not 1 + 1 = 2. Gurus' rough face showed a smile of victory. What are you waiting for? Prepare to launch an all-out attack. That guy Gruul can't wait. As everyone knew, Sal and Gruul did not see eye to eye. Unexpectedly, when Garush came to power, Gruul, the irascible guy, became like him. Leave it to me and my little brat. Ever since he came to Azeroth, Gruul could be considered to have a big heart and fat body. He slapped a few female Gorons and raised a few more smashes. The demigod monster Gruul's method of reproduction was very strange. It was more like the division of some kind of power than a normal pregnancy. Within a year, the smallest ones had grown to the same size as their older brothers. Their battle prowess was about the same. On this day, in the eyes of the Twilight believers, the Horde came to die again. The green tide that covered the mountains and plains rushed over, but it was a pity that it would crowd together at a few mountain passes. It was a perfect opportunity for the Twilight Dragon to unleash a round of dragon breath and wipe them all out. These days, there were simply too many orc corpses. The Twilight Dragon didn't even need to go out to look for food. Every day after the battle, it would fly down and devour fresh corpses. It was like a pattern of attack, and the Twilight Dragons didn't feel anything wrong. But when nearly 100 Twilight Dragons began to glide close to the ground and entered the state of swooping dragon breath, the scene in front of them suddenly changed. In their field of vision, more than 100 huge humanoid creatures broke into their field of vision without warning. They couldn't tell what was an illusion and what was real. Instinctively, they launched an attack on the big guys. Whoosh! The violent flames scorched the ground. The orcs that were burned by the flames immediately turned into humanoid torches, wailing and running. After a few moments, they fell to the ground and twitched, and then died easily as usual. But these huge humanoid monsters with rock-wrapped skin were not afraid of the Twilight Dragon's flames at all, showing a mobility beyond the imagination of the dragons. Some of them smashed out huge rocks the size of tanks. Some of them jumped 30 to 40 meters into the air and hugged the flying dragons. They fell to the ground together with the dragons with strange purplish-blue scales and wrestled with each other. The two largest adult dragons stared at Gruul, who was the largest of them all. They also directly served him with flames. Gruul, who was the size of a small mountain, showed agility that was not commensurate with his huge body. He made a sideways movement. Just by standing with his front and back legs, two blazing dragon breaths brushed past him. Behind him, there was a series of explosions that sounded like raging flames on the prairie. The dazzling light of the dragon breath made the surrounding mortals squint their eyes. Only Gruul ignored the shock wave caused by the explosion, and his whole body shot into the sky like a cannonball. The two Twilight Dragons opened their mouths angrily, raised their claws, flapped their wings, and attacked Gruul from the left and right. However, the unimaginable double acceleration allowed Gruul to pass between the two dragons' mouths and claws. Although it was not a direct hit, the left side of his neck, right arm, and left side of his waist were opened by the dragon claws. There was no blood, because Galan was a half-stone half-creature. The fatal wound in the eyes of others was just a superficial wound on Galan. Instead, Gruul grabbed the necks of the two dragons when he passed by. Roar! Caw-caw! The two dragons were thrown to the ground with their bellies facing the sky. Just as they were dizzy from the fall, Gruul made a very exaggerated move. He actually connected the necks of the two Twilight Dragons and tied a dead knot. The scene was very strange. The powerful dragons that had been wantonly slaughtering the tribal warriors these days became ridiculous toys in front of Gruul, an ancient demigod beast. Gruul stepped on the shoulder of a dragon and pulled the other dragon away with his hand. Because their necks were tied, the dragons began to lack oxygen, and their struggles became weaker and weaker. In the end, when the dragon's neck was pulled to the extreme, it exceeded the limit. Puff! The neck of the first Twilight Dragon was forcibly torn off. Gruul did not let the other one go. He directly used his giant claws to tear off the dragon's neck that was still connected to the other dragon's neck. Blood immediately sprayed out from the 4 gaping wounds, forming a series of fountains in mid-air, blood fountains. Ha ha ha. Wahahaha. Gruul looked up to the sky and laughed. His laughter was the main melody of today's battle. Chapter 1804. With the demigod Behemoth as the vanguard, the Horde finally charged into the Twilight Fortress. Receiving the news, Duque wasn't surprised at all. He even wanted to laugh. He laughed whenever he wanted to. Ha ha ha. Duque forgot that he was video chatting with Jaina through the magic mirror. Oh, it was a video conference. What's so funny? Jaina rested her chin on her hand, looking bored. After all, the Horde had gathered all its forces to attack the Twilight Fortress, leaving Theramore alone. Nothing. I'm laughing at the fact that Brainless Roar wants to divide the Horde while gathering all the masters of the Horde to deal with a beginner-level opponent. Duque was amused. Duque was right. According to the rules of World of Warcraft, every time a big event happened, there would be a beginner-level dungeon for the players to practice. Although the beginner-level dungeon, Twilight Fortress, was the most difficult among all the previous dungeons, it was still a beginner-level dungeon. As for the title, Brainless Roar, Duque had spread among the higher-ups of the Alliance since he often let it slip. Grom Hellroar was known as Lord Roar. It was ironic that his son was called Brainless Roar when he smashed Gurus. It proved the general rule that like father, like son, like son. Frustrated, Lord Roar went to Duque and said, "I'm me, and my son is my son. If one day you want me to fight with my son, and he's worthy of my efforts, I won't hesitate." Duque had to admire Lord Roar's unparalleled loyalty. Lord Roar was a real man who wasn't good with words. He didn't know how to teach people and was better at doing things directly. Once he did it, it was up to others how much others learned. One stayed in Azeroth to fight as a guerrilla, while the other stayed in Nagrand to be an otaku. The two of them had lost contact with each other for so many years, so it was inevitable that the son would turn bad and pick up bad habits. In fact, even Grom himself saw that something was wrong. Both he and Duque had the same unspoken red line in their minds: the Horde couldn't attack the Alliance. If Gurus declared war, they would have to take action. To be honest, Duque was very free these days. He was waiting for the last traitor to appear. On this day, the sun went down. The constant cycle of the sun and the moon made the moonlight woodland once again fall into that kind of quiet and peaceful atmosphere. The water vapor rising from the surface of the moon god lake mixed with the natural aura that permeated the air, causing the entire forest to seem to be enveloped in a layer of green gauze. The battle at Mount Hyjal hundreds of kilometers to the south did not affect this place at all. Apart from the addition of a few more guards, the atmosphere was still quiet. An extremely secretive aura enveloped a graceful female figure. She walked alone on a small path in the forest. The guards who passed by ignored her. After a few turns, she arrived in front of a treehouse. "Open the door." A crisp female voice rang out. The eyes of the elven guards were misty, and they revealed respectful expressions. "You're here? Lord Malfurion. Why didn't we get the report?" "I'm the report." The female elf's voice was proud. "Open the door. I want to see Fandral." In the ears of the guards, there was no problem at all. Two elven druids operated the spell formation and opened the door. The circular door, which was originally tightly sealed by countless vines, quickly opened because the vines retreated like snakes. The female elf walked with graceful steps down the stairs slowly and entered the basement where Fandral Staghelm was imprisoned. In accordance with the orders of the Great Master Zoth, I'm here to pick you up, Lord Fandral Staghelm. The female elf leisurely bowed to Fandral. After Zoth abandoned me and Savi's, he suddenly thought of me, a discarded chess piece? The corner of Fandral's mouth raised, revealing a mocking smile. Sensing that Fandral's mood was not right, the female elf hurriedly said, Master did not abandon you. In fact, Zoth is going to lose. Fandral's confident words made the female elf feel uneasy for the first time. You. The female elf suddenly let out a scream. She jumped forward a big step, completed a 180-degree turn in the air, and pulled out a series of movements such as two swords. Then, she saw the three people who had silently appeared behind her. Her heart instantly sank to the deepest part of the ice abyss. Duke Marcus, Isra, and Malfurion. Apart from Tyrant, almost all the big shots that she did not want to meet had appeared. Duke laughed. Fandral Staghelm is one of the few strong people in Kaldorii. Do you think that we would simply put him under house arrest and not take any precautions? At this moment, the humanoid Isra suddenly took a step forward. Her face was clearly sullen. Alice Razor. Why is this happening? The female elf was suddenly shocked. The shock and fear on her face froze for more than 3 seconds before her expression became extremely ugly. As expected. Have you found out? If it was an ordinary infiltrator or traitor, Duque would definitely not alarm Isra and let the great Emerald Dragon Queen come here. This Alice Razor had an identity that outsiders could not imagine. She was an ancient dragon of the Green Dragon Army. If possible, it was best to clean up traitors themselves. Outsiders forcibly cleaning up traitors on their behalf was a serious form of disrespect. The next second, the female elf opened her red lips, and a powerful sound wave mixed with natural elements and wind magic suddenly spread in the not-so-small basement. Wah! It sounded a little like a girl's cry. In reality, it was even more ear-piercing and difficult to accept. However, an attack of this level could not be effective. Alice Razor herself knew that. Almost at the same time as she roared, her entire body rose from the ground and slammed into the ceiling of the basement. She directly smashed through the thick rock layer and the exaggerated compound magic array, broke through the surface, and flew into the air. In a short 3 seconds, she finally used the ultimate transformation spell and changed from a small elf to her dragon form. However, Isra was faster. She quickly turned into a dragon and hovered diagonally below Alice Razor. The dragon aspect was even larger and more beautiful than its opponent. It was as if every scale on its body was made of jade or glass. It didn't waste any more words. With a roar, it spread its green wings and began to fight. The atmosphere of the entire moonlight forest trembled slightly. Isra shot into the air like a sharp arrow, heading straight for Alice Razor. The wind pressure produced by the flapping of the giant green wings almost blew away all the leaves on the surrounding branches. Even though Isra also cherished every blade of grass and tree in the moonlight forest, in order to drive the traitor out of the moonlight forest, she had no choice but to set off a terrifying storm in a small area. Chapter 1805. Apart from the ancient trees of war and the ancient trees of wisdom, which were beyond the scope of ordinary trees, all the ordinary trees were blown away by the storm. All the trees that were shorter than 2 people hugging each other were uprooted. The buildings with the typical elven style all disintegrated into countless pieces, like a lovelorn woman tearing apart all the love letters that a man had given her, and they scattered in the wind. He didn't know why, but beautiful things still gave people a sense of beauty when they were in battle. The 2 dragons collided in midair, and at that moment, the entire sky bloomed with a green glow. It wasn't just a physical battle at the top of the food chain, but also a spiritual battle that mortals couldn't imagine. It was a pity that the battle ended as quickly as it started. The battle in midair was decided in just 5 minutes. Be it in terms of size or spiritual attack strength, Alicerazer was at a disadvantage in all aspects. As Cenarius' adoptive mother, Isra was extremely familiar with the terrain and elemental distribution of the Moonlight Woodland. It could be said that Isra had the advantage of the right time, place, and people. A series of 4 claws and dragon tail attacks made the traitor flustered, and a strong spiritual shock wave similar to Mind Blast caused the traitor's thinking speed to decrease rapidly. Alicerazer finally couldn't hold on any longer, and her movements clearly slowed down for a moment. The massive Emerald Guardian Wyrm seized the opportunity, dodged, and performed an aerial combat maneuver similar to Engerman's spin. After twisting its body in midair, it swooped down and grabbed the traitor's shoulder and neck near the dragon's head. "Sleep forever, my friend. My friend." Isra's soft voice was the final judgment. There were no wounds or pain. It was more like an exile of the soul. Duque could clearly see Alicerazer's soul floating away from her body. Her soul and dragon body had been separated forever. The next second, a beautiful emerald energy ball appeared in the sky and contained the soul that had become beautiful again. The soul that had been purified might very well become a part of the Emerald Dream forever. The dragon body that had lost its soul slowly descended under the support of a mysterious power. She was even coiled up nicely, as if she had just fallen into a deep sleep. A beautiful death. An ending without any regrets. Duque let out a long sigh and looked down the hole. There, Malfurion tried to persuade Fandral one last time. "Are you still unwilling to wake up?" Fandral shook his head calmly. "I'm very disappointed in this world. If it weren't for my granddaughter, I must admit that I would have thrown myself into the cause of world destruction. Take good care of her for me, this is my last wish. Of course, if you are still afraid that I will betray you, you can kill me. I have no complaints." Malfurion pursed his lips and bit them so hard that they almost bled. His hand gripped the staff tightly, and the protruding veins showed the struggle in his heart. If he killed Fandal, it would put an end to everything. But would he be able to forgive himself in the long years to come? After several hesitations, Malfurion finally made the decision. "I have to take responsibility for my own mistakes. My brother, Illidan Stormrage, was sentenced to 10,000 years in prison for killing his brethren. After he came out, he committed an even greater crime, so he will be imprisoned again." Malfurion pointed at his disciple. "You too. I can't do anything for you anymore. I only hope that one day, you will find your own salvation." With that, Malfurion chanted a spell and sealed the broken underground prison. He ordered the elven warden who had heard the news, transfer him to May of Shadowsong. In the sky, Isra returned to his human form and slowly descended to Duque's side. Even though he had successfully taken care of the traitor, there was only a faint sadness on Isra's face. "Thank you, Duque. Please forgive me. I really can't be happy." "That's natural. No one would feel good after this." Duque comforted Isra. "Do you know? I believe that fate is with you." Duque lowered his head. "Fate is only with justice and truth. You're too humble." Isra did something that surprised Duque. She stepped forward and hugged Duque firmly. She even moved closer to Duque's ear and said in her soft voice, "In the dream that fate revealed to me, I saw a tragic future. That is the end of the dragon aspects, and the end of us brothers and sisters. The only one left in the future is Alexstrasza. If this is my fate, then can you reverse mine?" Duque shuddered. He did not know how to answer. The Titans had given the 5 dragon aspects magical powers that surpassed most creatures in the mortal world. It was difficult for Duque to comment on this kind of prophetic dream, but he could faintly sense a trace of unwillingness and regret in Izura's tone. As if comforting Izura, Duque gently wrapped his hands around Izura's shoulders and let his body heat pass over. The reason why mortals praise and praise heroes and their greatness is because heroes reverse the inevitable fate of destruction and death. If everything in the world is already predetermined by fate, then what's the point of hard work for mortals and demigods? Someone once said to me, if you never forget it, there will be an echo. So, having confidence may not necessarily win, but without confidence, you will definitely lose. If we don't work hard, then we can't talk about victory or even reversing fate. As soon as Duque finished speaking, he felt a bit of moisture in his chest. What if Izura was crying? Izura said softly, what if, with just one's own hard work, no matter how hard you try, you still can't escape the cycle of destruction? You don't have to lie to me. Nosdorm obviously knows something, he's already. Duque's heart skipped a beat. He could faintly feel the shift in fate, but he was not too sure, and did not know if he should spoil Izura. He took a deep breath and finally said, if, at the very end, you are sure that you can't escape the shackles of fate with just your own hard work, then you might as well give your fate to someone you can trust. Let him do things that you might not be able to do. For example, like Onyxia, giving your fate completely to you? Izura raised his head and opened his eyes slightly, revealing a pair of psychedelic eyes. Duque said righteously, I don't deny that's a good idea. You're tuning into the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.